looks as if it's on here.
They've got views as well. They've got lights on.
We'll suspend briefly until we resolve this matter.
I thought everyone was checked before.
Yeah,
No, that was it. Whatever it was.
Slight touch of déjà vu here, but the first item of business this afternoon is time for reflection. Our time for reflection leader today is Reverend Amanda Reid, Spiritual Care and Bereavement Lead at CHAS, the Children's Hospice across Scotland. Reverend Reid.
Presiding officers, members of Scottish Parliament, thank you for the opportunity to offer today's time for reflection during Children's Hospice Week. Across Scotland, there are children whose lives are short and families who live with a kind of courage that is quiet, constant and often unseen. In Children's Hospices across Scotland, CHAS, we have the privilege of walking alongside them. At Robin House and Rachel House and through our teams in hospitals and homes, we meet families at times of joy, fear, uncertainty and love. People often imagine children's hospices as a place of sadness, but those of us who work in them know that they're also places of laughter, places of music, storytelling and of deep connection. They are places where lives are lived fully, sometimes in the small moments, sometimes in the extraordinary ones, but always with tenderness and with dignity. In my role as Spiritual Care and Bereavement Lead and Chaplain of Robin House Children's Hospice, I meet families who are navigating the unimaginable. And what strikes me again and again is not only their grief, but their love. A love that is fierce, a love that is patient, love that endures. And that love asks us as a society to ensure that no family walks this path alone. Children's Hospice Week invites us to pause and to recognise the value of presence, the simple act of being with one another. Now, presence does not fix what is hard. It does not take away the pain, but it says you matter. Your story matters. Your child matters. In the hospice, presence looks like holding a hand, like listening to a memory, or sitting in silence when there are no words. It looks like staff supporting one another after a difficult day. It looks like volunteers making tea or playing music or tending the garden so that families can just breathe for a moment. And during this week, we also honour the children who have died. Their names are spoken with love. Their families carry them forward in stories, in gestures, in the quiet ways they continue to shape the world around them. Grief does not end, but neither does love. And as we reflect today, I invite us to hold on to three things. First, gratitude. Gratitude for the children who teach us how precious each moment is. Second, compassion. Compassion for the families who show us what courage looks like. And third, commitment. Commitment to ensuring that every child in Scotland with a life-shortening condition receives the care, the dignity and the support that they deserve. Carry this gratitude, compassion and commitment well into this session and all that lies beyond. Thank you for listening and for holding Scotland's children with life-shortening conditions and their families in your thoughts today.
The next item of business is general questions. Question 1, Holyrood.
I refer to my register of interest as a member of Glasgow City Council to ask the Scottish Government what action it will take to assist Glasgow City Council in securing the necessary funding, resources and practical support required to keep the historic Queen's Park Glasshouses open, preserved and thriving as a valued community asset.
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallum.
Presiding Officer, this Government appreciates the historic and community value of the Queen's Park Glasshouses. Responsibility for their operation rests with Glasgow City Council. However, I am very happy to engage with the Council and with partners. Such discussions can include help to facilitate access to relevant funding programmes, encouraging partnership and community-led approaches, and ensuring that the Council has advice and guidance from Historic Environment Scotland on suitable conservation.
Holyrood.
I thank the Cabinet Sec for that answer, but as they will know, Glasgow faces a unique responsibility with its array of listed heritage buildings within council ownership, coupled with an acute lack of capital infrastructure funding. In Glasgow Southside, we are already navigating the devastating prolonged closures of Govan Hill Baths and Langside Hall. We cannot allow the historic Queen's Park Glasshouses to become the next victim of this funding gap. The Glasgow Building Preservation Trust estimates that £400,000 is urgently needed to safeguard this vital community asset. Will the Cabinet Secretary commit today to meeting with myself, representatives from Glasgow City Council and local campaigners at the Glasshouses during the upcoming recess period to explore how we can bridge that funding gap?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank the member for her follow-up question, and she will know the Government's understanding of the importance of these matters, not least in the investment that we're committed to making to the People's Palace in Glasgow, and my colleague, Minister Tom Arthur, will update Parliament on those plans shortly. But projects such as the Queen's Park Glasshouses, these can draw on a range of funding sources. The Government provide direct support for similarly ambitious projects through our Regeneration Capital Grant Fund and the Place-Based Investment Programme. And I would add there's over £12 million of annual historic environment Environment Scotland grants for conservation, restoration and community engagement, and opportunities also exist through the National Lottery Heritage Fund. It is worth noting, Presiding Officer, that a blended approach which combines public funding, partner contributions and community-led fundraising is often the most successful route.
Thank you. Before I take a supplementary from Paul Sweeney, I'd like to remind members that you only press your button when you come to your own question or wish to ask a supplementary to someone else's question. There are people here who I believe do not want to ask a question about this specific issue but have pressed their button. One of those is not Paul Sweeney, so Mr Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary outlined an array of funding options, and capital funding is certainly one thing. But ongoing revenue funding is the challenge here in the immediate term, and that's a direct result of disproportionate cuts by the Scottish Government to Glasgow City Council's core budget. So would the Cabinet Secretary identify any potential short-term funding that could allow the Council to maintain the operation of the asset in the next 3 months to bridge the gap so we can get an agreed new permanent use in place?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I want to restate in response to Paul Sweeney that I understand the connection that is felt to the Queen's Park Glasshouses. I've anecdotally got my own family in the south side of Glasgow for whom this was a really important day out, and of course we want to see it continue. What I have set out today is my willingness to have discussions with the Glasgow City Council and indeed with community groups and with MSPs who are keen to see the glasshouses back up and running. And I've also made clear the range of funding sources that exist. I take on board what Mr Sweeney says in respect of revenue versus capital funding. These are the matters that can be taken forward as part of the discussions I've offered to have.
Thank you. Question 2, Heather Anderson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I refer to my register of interest and declare I'm a serving councillor with Dundee City Council. My question is to ask the Scottish Government for its response to the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh's calls for a national pilot programme to monitor air pollution around the city primary schools.
Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The placement of air quality monitors is prioritised to cover potential air pollution hotspots. Additionally, over time, local authorities have progressively adapted their monitoring strategies to address specific local air quality issues. And this approach ensures that any areas of concern will be covered, including those locations where vulnerable groups may be present, such as schools.
Heather Anderson.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. We know there's a correlation between areas of high deprivation and poor air quality in both children and adults, and that exacerbates pre-existing health inequalities. And we know that children are amongst the most susceptible to harm from air pollution. In Dundee, we're lucky enough to work with Professor Jill Belch, who's a Professor of Vascular Medicine at the University of Dundee School of Medicine, and she has advised me that only 4 of our 34 primary schools are within the 250-metre range of any accurate monitoring equipment. This simply means that at present...
Question, please.
We don't know how safe our children are from damaging air pollution in 30 of our primaries. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary whether she would welcome Dundee City Council piloting an air monitoring project at primary schools in our city?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. Of course, I would welcome anything that the Council decides to do in relation to where they put their monitors and any pilot they might want to go forward with. Improving air quality to protect the health of Scotland's population, particularly children and young people, is a key priority. The latest air quality data shows that Dundee is meeting its air quality objectives, which is great news, so reflecting sustained improvements across the whole of the city. And this is underpinned by a robust monitoring network. We've got 6 automatic monitoring stations, supplemented by 89 non-automatic monitors located in areas that are identified by the local authority as having the most need. And of course, the low emission zone in Dundee is helping to drive cleaner air. So the decision on where the monitors are placed is for the Council. They tend to be in the areas of higher pollution. So if those monitors are showing a decrease in pollution, then that's obviously having an effect across the whole of the city.
Supplementary, Mark Ruskell.
Thanks. The science shows that even if we have very modest improvements in air quality, it does result in significant improvements in health, particularly in disadvantaged communities, Cabinet Secretary. So will the Scottish Government be revising the current out-of-date air quality standards that we have in Scotland to reflect the better, more up-to-date, more science-based World Health Organization standards, which will start to put some of the ambition back into our air quality strategy. I know that the Cabinet Secretary will be revising the air quality strategy. Will she reflect on the fact that we need better, more up-to-date standards?
Cabinet Secretary.
WHO?
Well, Mark Ruskell's absolutely right. 2026 is a key year for this. Proposals for long-term air quality policy.
Indeed, committing to ensuring that there is a new train station at Winchborough. We are continuing to work with West Lothian Council and Winchborough developments in that regard, and I'll hopefully be able to update the Chamber in the not-too-distant future in respect of that.
Jenny Young.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. It currently takes more than an hour to get the bus from Winchborough to central Edinburgh. That is a journey of under 15 miles. The train to Waverley would take around 15 minutes. Last week, the Cabinet Secretary opened a debate about growing Scotland's economy, a subject on which I know is very close to his heart and very important to our country. So does he appreciate just how important this station will be for the local economy and for Scotland's wider economy? And can he tell my constituents when they will be able to board the first train?
Cabinet Secretary.
I would love to be in a position to do that here today. I think what it's important to recognise is that it is for West Lothian Council and the Winchborough developments to take forward construction of a new station, but we are willing to engage with them in that process. And of course, they've already been in communication with government in that regard. I hear her championing of this cause. As I've read, it was championed by other members of the Chamber prior to the election, and I can assure her and her constituents that I'm very conscious of that.
Supplementary, Pauline Stafford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I refer members to my register of interest as an elected member on West Lothian Council? I welcome the Scottish Government's clear commitment to the delivery of a Winchborough station, including reference to its delivery in both this year's budget statement and in the SNP election manifesto. The Cabinet Secretary will also be aware of the important work undertaken by his predecessor, Fiona Hislop, as the previous local constituency MSP, and Minister Jim Fairley, in convening partners through a steering group. Will he commit to building on that work and continuing to provide the leadership needed to bring partners together to ensure that this long-awaited station is delivered?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you for that follow-up question. I think it is important to place on record the important work that the former constituency member, Mrs Hislop, did in regards to this, and indeed Mr Fairley in his ministerial post. I look forward to working with the new constituency member to take forward this matter, and I'm sure that we'll be able to do that in a collegiate fashion.
Question 4, Martin Day.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made regarding funding for the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme.
Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is in close contact with Falkirk Council on how to progress the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme. In February this year, we provided £1.6 million to Falkirk Council, and this will be used to support the next stage of development of the scheme. And this is in addition to the £23 million that Falkirk Council has received from the Scottish Government for the scheme since 2016-2017.
Martin Day.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Falkirk Council deserves credit for the years of work it has put into managing flood risk. With climate change increasing, the risk of flooding around Grangemouth and upstream, plans to protect 6,000 people, 2,760 homes, 1,200 businesses and 23 kilometres of roads from a major flood event are very welcome. Can I ask the Minister, as initial design work is about to start, what discussions the Scottish Government has had with the major industrial companies in Grangemouth regarding their financial contribution to the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Martin Day for that very important supplementary question. We will continue to work with Falkirk Council, the UK Government, businesses and investors to secure a long-term sustainable future for the industrial cluster. And our officials, my officials in flood policy, have been invited to join the Grangemouth Future Industry Board, where those substantive discussions on how local companies can contribute to the scheme can happen. And I'm certain that offers of private contributions will be greatly appreciated by the local authority, given that the scheme will ultimately protect those businesses as well as residents. More generally, Scotland's National Flood Resilience Strategy commits to exploring new ways public and private finance can contribute to creating flood-resilient places.
Supplementary, Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This scheme is so big, it is of UK significance, and it's always been my view that the UK Government should be helping to fund it. So Has the Cabinet Secretary been in any direct discussions with the UK Government about sourcing funding for this scheme?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Graeme Simpson for that question, and I agree with the sort of substantive premise of it. I mean, flood defences are, of course, for the Scottish Government, but given the size of this scheme, any contribution would be welcome. Obviously, the UK Government have been working with the Scottish Government on the areas around the industrial cluster, but he raises a very important point. In schemes like this, which are multifaceted, we need to look where we can find additional support where needed. And I'll certainly look back. I don't think I've actually asked the UK Government for any assistance in this particular scheme, but I'll certainly take his suggestion on board.
Question 5, Liam Kerr.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will honour in full commitments made by previous Ministers for Transport to upgrade road infrastructure in the north east of Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Stephen Flynn.
Yes.
Liam Kerr.
Well, I'm very grateful to hear that reassurance, because the Minister will know the dangers of the A90 north of Ellon, particularly at the Tulliburness and the Cortes junctions, which the SNP Government have shamefully failed to address. In fact, in 2007, Alex Salmond promised to dual the A90 in his first 100 days as First Minister. So, having failed to deliver for approaching 2 decades, will this Cabinet Secretary commit to a completion date or follow his predecessors by abandoning communities north of Ellon?
Cabinet Secretary.
Of course, Presiding Officer, in order to get to Ellon from the south, people right across Scotland have the opportunity to drive on the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route, a near £1 billion project that was delivered by that then SNP Government, which Mr Kerr seems to have forgotten even exists. In relation to the junction which he refers to, or indeed the road slip which he refers to, it's one which I go past very often on my way up to Peterhead. We made a clear commitment in our manifesto and we'll stick to that.
Supplementary, Jack Middleton.
Can the Cabinet Secretary remind the Chamber what improvements to road infrastructure the SNP Government has made in the North East and outline what more they will deliver in the future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Of course I can, Presiding Officer, but I appreciate members are conscious of time, so I don't want to list them all. But what I can do is draw Mr Middleton's attention to what I drew Mr Kerr's attention to, which is the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route, a huge investment into the north east of Scotland and the city of Aberdeen, which has improved the lives of so many of his constituents and ensured that we've got consistent economic growth in our city.
Question 6, Catherine Sangster.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the progress it has made towards reducing the number of teachers on short-term and temporary contracts.
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallan.
Local authorities are responsible for teacher employment practices, Presiding Officer, as they are the employer of teachers. However, the Government is doing everything possible to maximise the number of teaching jobs available, including permanent posts. The 26-27 budget continues to provide local authorities with an additional £186.5 million to protect teacher numbers. The number of teachers in Scotland's classrooms has increased by more than 2,700 over the last decade as a result of investment, and we have the best teacher-pupil ratio in the UK. Additionally, however, in recognition of difficulties in securing permanent posts, we've committed to delivering the forms necessary to provide a jobs guarantee for a minimum of 3 years for newly qualified teachers.
Catherine Sangster.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Teaching unions have raised concerns that how local authorities advertise temporary contracts is making accessing work difficult for some teachers, creating an inequality for those with caring responsibilities or people who are unable to check their phones because they are working. However, the advertising sites used are not collecting data that would highlight the scale of the issue. Will the Cabinet Secretary commit to looking into ways to collect this data to ensure that all teachers have equal access to work?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as we do the careful work that's required to design and thereafter to implement the conditions for a 3-year teaching job guarantee, I will of course consider, among many other issues, the points that Catherine Sangster has put to me there about the very practical question of how roles are advertised and the ways that different individuals with different needs are able to access them. That is but one important part of developing the right conditions for the 3-year teacher job guarantee which the Government is undertaking.
Supplementary, Colm Merrick.
The SNP Scottish Government's plans to deliver the reforms necessary to provide a teacher jobs guarantee for a minimum of 3 years for newly qualified teachers is one I hope we can all welcome. Can the Cabinet Secretary say how they anticipate this measure will support Scotland's teaching workforce?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I recognise and the Government recognises that the lack of available jobs after probation has, for some prospective teachers, been a significant concern. And the commitment to a teacher's job guarantee demonstrates that we have listened to that and are prepared and determined to work with partners to find solutions. Now, the measures will provide greater certainty at the start of a teacher's career, supporting early career retention and morale, whilst helping to ensure a more stable and sustainable workforce.
Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Former Education Secretary, now Deputy First Minister, Jenny Gilruth said in January this year that teachers would need to relocate to where the jobs are. Mike Corbett from NEWUST condemned these comments. So can I therefore ask whether the new Cabinet Secretary agrees with the Deputy First Minister, or does she agree that it's down to a dysfunctional teacher supply system that still sees teachers trapped in short-term or temporary contracts?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think on the substance of Megan Gallagher's question, setting aside any misquoting of Cabinet Secretaries, on the substance of the question, it is, as I put to Colin Metric, the fact that the Government has invested significantly in the retention and the growth of teacher numbers in Scotland. We understand the importance that comes with finishing one's probation and then being able to move into secure employment. And that's why, alongside the other investments that we are making, we are committing to and doing the work required to develop a teacher jobs guarantee, and I'll look forward to working with members and with COSLA as we develop that.
Andrew Baxter.
Register of Interests as a sitting councillor on Highland Council. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of how any reduction in hours or withdrawal of pupil support assistant posts will impact rural primary schools, particularly in the Highlands and Islands region.
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallan.
Presiding Officer, pupil support assistants play an absolutely vital role in our classrooms, in our schools and in our young people's education. They are essential and they are valued members of the school learning teams and communities. That's why, Presiding Officer, we continue to provide £15 million each year to help local authorities maintain record levels of investment in these vital staff.
Andrew Baxter.
Recognising the importance of our PSAs, but every summer pupils, parents, teachers and pupil support assistants are left wondering what their classroom will look like after the holidays. One PSA recently told me they were informed before the start of the school day that there was no allocation for their post beyond the summer. Having just moved into their first rented flat, they do not know how they will pay the bills. Does the Cabinet Secretary accept that this annual cycle of uncertainty is failing both staff and pupils? And what action will the Scottish Government take with local authorities to ensure young people receive the support they need to reach their full potential?
Cabinet Secretary.
I recognise the seriousness of the issue that Andrew Baxter raises in Parliament today. I think it bears repeating, Presiding Officer, that local authorities are the employers of teachers, and therefore any assessment that is done regarding reduction of hours or withdrawal of pupil support staffs in any school, but in the rural setting that he mentions, is a matter for them. However, I am clear that they must allocate resources, including for pupil support staff, on the basis of local needs and priorities, and crucially through meaningful engagement with the school community.
Supplementary, Colin Beattie.
Pupil support assistants have an essential role to play in our classrooms. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide any update regarding steps the SNP Scottish Government is taking to support schools, including in Scotland's rural areas, to deliver more pupil support staff?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can, Presiding Officer. It's worth noting for a moment where we are just now. Latest figures show we have 16,908 pupil support assistants in Scotland. This is the third highest level on record and an increase of nearly 1,645 since 2020. However, in our manifesto, this Government committed to considering ways that we can support the career pathways of pupil support staff by enhancing training, development and accreditation in order to improve recruitment and retention, ensuring that these valued members of staff can make an impact in young people's lives.
Question 8, Katie Hagman.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the work carried out by the Scottish Transport Emissions Partnership in relation to local air quality management.
Cabinet Secretary Stephen Flynn.
Presiding Officer, I think all of us recognise the importance of clean air, particularly those of us with weans who we walk around with. Unfortunately, the Scottish Transport Emissions Partnership is no longer active, but I can advise Katie Hagman that action is currently driven by the Cleaner Air for Scotland strategy.
Katie Hagman.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. He will be aware that the A77 trunk road runs through Girvan in my constituency, carrying significant HGV traffic to and from the port of Cairnryan. Local groups, including Go Girvan, a community regeneration group, are seeking support for monitoring air quality, noise and vibration impacts through Girvan. Given Transport Scotland's responsibility for the trunk road network, can the Cabinet Secretary outline what direct support his officials can provide, and would he be willing to meet with the group to discuss their concerns and note their request for a feasibility study for a bypass within the town?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I thank Katie Hagman for her question, and I'm very sympathetic to the arguments that have been put forward by campaigners. It's of course very hard not to be. What I have asked is for my officials to engage with those campaigners and to feed back to me as quickly as possible as to whether any action could be within the scope of the government.
Thank you, colleagues. That concludes general questions. Apologies to those whose supplementaries were not called due to time constraints. The next item of business is First Minister's questions for backbench members. Question 1, Alex Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to the First Minister's decision to call a bank holiday for Scotland's first World Cup game in almost 28 years. My constituents were able to watch one of our own, Lewis Ferguson, raised in the village of Quarter and trained by Hamilton Accies, help deliver our first World Cup win in 36 years without worrying about the recovery on Monday. Could the First Minister tell the Parliament what his visit to America achieved for Scotland and how he intends to build on our men's team, making history to get people across the nation taking up our national support, particularly after we win the World Cup?
Appreciate the ambition. First Minister.
President Officer, let me begin by expressing the warmest congratulations of everyone in the Scottish Parliament and indeed the whole of our country at the outstanding performance of Steve Clark, Andy Robertson and the Scotland team and the Tartan Army, who were an absolute credit to our country in the United States at the weekend. It was a particular pleasure for me to see our fans make such a positive impression in Boston and to capture the imagination and the interest of the city. The Governor of Massachusetts and the Mayor of Boston both indicated to me on Friday evening their joy of what the fans had brought to the city, and of course I, like everyone else, was able to witness on Saturday the success of our team in winning against Haiti, and it augurs well for the remainder of the World Cup campaign. In relation to Mr Kerr's question, obviously the success and the capturing of the imagination of the country around about the sporting events at the weekend helped to reinforce the importance of sport within our society, and the Government has announced a variety of different initiatives to encourage a summer of sport, which includes support for the World Cup Fund to support young boys and girls to follow their sporting dreams, and also £275,000 of funding to support the work delivered across the country by Street Soccer Scotland. And of course the Summer of Sport contains a number of other welcome initiatives to encourage sporting participation in the country. But I think, Presiding Officer, we should all take stock after the weekend and be very, very grateful for the tremendous inspiration given by the Scotland national team and by the Tartan Army, who are a credit to our country.
Neil Bibby.
Thanks to SNP cuts, health and social care partnerships across Scotland face a £500 million gap in their budgets this year. In Renfrewshire, if nothing changes, the Disability Resource Centre in Paisley will close. The Autism Connection programme will be cut back. Day centres for adults with learning disabilities will be merged. These are vital services, and Friday is decision day. Can I ask the First Minister to tell me what my vulnerable neighbours and their families are meant to do if these cuts go ahead?
First Minister.
So in the Government's budget for this current financial year, we put in place increased financial support for the health service and increased financial support for local government. And from those two increased budgets comes the health and social care budgets to which Mr Bibby refers. Now, I understand and appreciate the significance of all of the projects that Mr Bibby has set out, but we rely on health and social care partnerships to take considered decisions about the delivery of services within localities, and Mr Bibby has put his points on the record about the importance of supporting services for the vulnerable, and that's why the Government increased the budgets for both health and local government to enable that to be the case. But I think what Mr Bibby's question highlights is the need for there to be reform in the way in which we deliver care at local level and support. And that's where Parliament has an opportunity to engage together in addressing some of the important questions that Mr Bibby puts to me. So the Government will be setting out proposals about reform of health and social care within our communities, about making sure the needs of people are met, and I look forward to engaging in constructive discussion with people like Mr Bibby, because if we want to deliver for the vulnerable in our society, we've all got to prepare to take the tough decisions to make sure services meet the needs of the people in our communities.
Heather Anderson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This morning I was dismayed to learn that the Principal of Dundee University has gone ahead with an announcement of a further £20 million of cuts, which would require up to 200 more job losses at the university. The impact this is having on the staff at Dundee University in our town cannot be overstated. I'm particularly concerned that the university has, in my view, failed to adequately engage with the trade unions, despite significant public funding having been provided to prevent these further job losses. Does the First Minister share my deep concern on behalf of my constituents, and can he provide an update on the Scottish Government's engagement with the university leadership?
First Minister.
So let me first of all say that obviously as a member who represents a constituency that adjoins the City of Dundee, I have local interests in this particular question, but I will answer this as First Minister. The announcement by the University of Dundee this morning of a consultation on further job cuts is extremely disappointing. And Heather Anderson is absolutely right that there is public funding involved, but along with public funding being involved is the necessity to make sure that any utilisation of those public funds is compliant with the conditions that were associated with the Section 25 direction that was given by ministers on a previous occasion. Now, the Scottish Funding Council has looked at the proposals from the University of Dundee and is, in its assessment, believes that the university has complied with the funding conditions. Ministers have not been assured on the detail of this, and we will require to see this as the direction came from ministers. Of course, we've got to be very careful about the accountabilities here, because the University of Dundee is an independent institution. The Scottish Funding Council acts independently, but on this particular issue, there is a ministerial direction using powers in Section 25 of legislation which directs how this funding can be used. The Education Secretary has spoken to the University Principal, also the Chair of Court, and also with the Funding Council about these issues, and the Government will continue to engage. But the assurance I will give Heather Anderson is this, that the Government will be absolutely attaching the greatest priority to meaningful and effective dialogue with members of staff who I recognise will be feeling deeply alarmed by the announcements that were made by the University, and the conditions from the Government require substantive engagement with staff and trade unions, and the Government will make sure that that is the case.
Andrew Baxter.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When the call comes, Coast Guard rescue officers drop everything, leaving work, family and home to help save lives. I'm sure the First Minister shares my concerns about proposals from the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency to remove payments for emergency call-outs and training. And will he join MSPs from across Parliament in calling on the UK Government and MCA to think again? What action will he take to highlight the vital role these officers play in keeping our communities safe?
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Baxter for raising such an important issue, and this arises out of a recent court decision which has resulted in the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency withdrawing payments to individuals who are volunteering as part of the Coast Guard service. Now, Mr Baxter is absolutely right about the significant dependence we have on individuals volunteering, but the removal of payments as opposed to the payment of expenses is quite a significant factor to be wrestled with by the volunteers in the Coast Guard team. I will happily write to United Kingdom Government Ministers on this question. It's an entirely reserved issue, as Mr Baxter correctly sets out. But in setting out that view, I will set out the fact that Mr Baxter has raised this with me in Parliament, and the issue commands support across the political spectrum, and I'll reflect that in the communication to the MCA.
Can I say, unless we get shorter questions and shorter answers, we're going to get a lot fewer questions than we did last week. Katie Clark.
Research from the GMB trade union has found that over 1 million people in Scotland are now affected by council tax debt arrears, with almost 250,000 threatened with court action last year. Will the Scottish Government look at reforming debt collection processes similar to the reforms announced for England by the UK Government and already implemented in Wales?
First Minister.
The Government has, of course, more extensive support in place to support council tax payments, because council tax benefit exists in Scotland where it doesn't exist in other parts of the United Kingdom because of policy decisions taken by this Government. So we're providing practical support to people in the payment of their council tax bills. Now, we have written off a certain amount of council tax debt, but obviously council tax payments are essential to support the delivery of local services. But I will explore what other measures can be taken to ensure advice and support is available to people to make sure they can pay council tax. But I stress, many people are eligible for council tax benefit in Scotland when they are not in other parts of the UK.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Changes made by the UK Government mean that the Motability Scheme annual allowable mileage reduces from 20,000 to 10,000 miles, but critically excess mileage charges go up fivefold to 25 pence per mile. One of my constituents has been in contact with me saying she's concerned she can't afford a lease for a new car, which is a lifeline service. While the July the 1st deadline doesn't apply in Scotland, can the First Minister outline when proposals were announced for their agreement for the service in Scotland, and what could be done to offset another Westminster attack on the disabled?
First Minister.
Mr Brown raises a significant issue, particularly for motability car users in rural Scotland, where distance issues will be far more extensive than in more urban communities. Now, these are changes made by the United Kingdom Government as a consequence of changes to tax exemptions in the November budget last year, implemented and taken forward by the UK Labour Government, which quite correctly, Mr Brown says, erodes the rights of disabled people. The 1st of July 2026 commencement date announced by Motability for its changes in the rest of the UK is not going to apply in Scotland. However, there may be other changes required, but I will ensure that relevant ministers are in dialogue with Motability and also with Mr Brown to make sure that the legitimate concerns he raises with me are properly pursued to protect users in Scotland, and particularly those in rural areas.
Holly Bruce.
To ask the First Minister if he will join me in celebrating the contribution of refugees and migrants to communities across Scotland, and can he provide an update on when his government will introduce the long-awaited Scottish Human Rights Bill so that the freedoms of new Scots are protected?
First Minister.
President Officer, let me say to Holly Bruce that the Government is working on the human rights legislation, and obviously we will bring that forward when it is fully developed. It is complex legislation and will require substantive dialogue with Parliament. In relation to her question on the welcome to refugees, I associate myself entirely with her comments, and I think Scotland has always been, and certainly under my leadership will always be, a welcoming and an inclusive country. I saw there was quite a contrast on the streets of Glasgow at the weekend between many thousands of peaceful individuals setting out their welcome to refugees and a limited number of balaclava-wearing individuals doing Nazi salutes on the streets of our country. And I could not condemn those individuals and their behaviour more strongly today in this Parliament. This is a welcoming country, and the behaviour of the far right has no place on our streets.
Don Black.
Offshore Energies UK has warned that North Sea energy infrastructure should be designated critical national infrastructure and as such should be guarded by the Navy and Air Force to protect against potential Russian attacks. The Westminster UK Government has failed for years to properly invest in adequate defence provision in our North Sea, leaving our energy infrastructure vulnerable. Does the First Minister agree that it's urgent that additional defence investment is directed towards the North Sea as a priority, and will he join me in calling on the Westminster Government to do so?
First Minister.
There's obviously been a great deal of debate around this issue in the course of the last few days subsequent to the resignation of the Secretary of State for Defence. And the point that Don Black puts to me is an important one, because we have huge coastline interests and maritime interests around the coastline of Scotland. But in my view, that is not adequately protected because of the disproportionate investment that is made by the UK Government in weapons of mass destruction that the UK cannot now adequately support, as well as maintain our defence footprint to protect the vital interests and infrastructure that Don Black refers to. So I think the shift in UK priorities to protect our coastline, to make sure that to the north of Scotland we have actually got some capability to stand up to the threats that we face from Russia under the Putin regime, requires us to reshape our defence priorities, and a greater investment in maritime conventional defence forces and the removal of our commitment to nuclear weapons would, for me, be a far more sensible defence strategy for this country.
Adam Harley.
My constituent Hugo is 9 years old. Following a case of strep throat, he developed severe OCD, tics, hallucinations and significant weight loss. He was eventually diagnosed with the autoimmune condition pans pandas. Today, Hugo's doing much better, but only after his family spent over £6,000 to see a private specialist in London. Sadly, Hugo's experience is not unique. Families across Scotland have been forced to seek private treatment because pans pandas is not recognised within NHS clinical guidance. So, does the First Minister agree that no parent in Scotland should be forced to pay thousands of pounds just to make their child well? And will his government take steps to ensure that pans pandas is properly recognised in NHS guidance?
First Minister.
I'm sorry to hear about the circumstances that Mr Harley raises about his constituent Hugo, and this will come into the category of rare diseases because, as Mr Harley refers to, there will be relatively few cases that are applied, and the Government has measures in place through the Rare Disease Action Plan, which tries to address the very issues that Mr Harley raises with me, of identifying what steps we can take within what is a very broad National Health Service to make sure the needs of absolutely everybody and their specialist requirements are met. But I'll ask the Health Secretary to engage directly about this constituency case and see if there is any further action that can be taken. But I reassure Mr Harley that on the general question, the Government is focusing on trying to ensure that rare diseases are properly and fully appreciated within the NHS.
Lloyd Melville.
Thank you, and I refer to my register of interest as a sitting Angus councillor. In recent days, the BBC has highlighted the long-standing issues with empty units on Arbroath High Street, a matter which I know is a key priority for my constituents. So can the First Minister tell the Chamber what steps the Scottish Government is taking to support Scotland's high streets, including in Arbroath, so that they can remain the thriving hearts of our communities?
First Minister.
So one of the steps that we took was to devolve empty property relief to local authorities with a concurrent transfer of £105 million each year to local government, and to incentivise the reoccupation of empty non-domestic properties. Eligible properties may claim 100% fresh start relief for up to 12 months. And we are determined, alongside the steps that are in place which will benefit many of the businesses or properties to which Mr Melville refers, will be eligible for the small business bonus scheme as well. The Government is also supporting regeneration in town centres with over £50 million committed in the 26-27 budget, and I hope these measures are effective and successful in supporting the work that Mr Melville is taking forward to support developments in Arbroath.
Carol Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. With the World Cup underway and the Commonwealth Games due to take place here in Scotland over summer, thousands of children and young people here in Scotland are being exposed to alcohol marketing. And this is associated with national pride and with sport and alcohol branding. What assessment has the Scottish Government made of the impact of these alcohol partnerships, given there is clear evidence to suggest that more young people are exposed to alcohol, the more young people are exposed to alcohol marketing, the more likely they are to consume and start drinking alcohol at an early age?
First Minister.
A crucial part of that work is the engagement the Government takes forward with those stakeholders who are concerned about the issues that Carol Mochan raises, and also the participation of the alcohol industry in taking forward the responsible approaches to alcohol consumption and the requirement to ensure that forms part of our wider discussion. Now, I know from my discussions with organisations such as the Scotch Whisky Association the importance they attach to being active participants in the promotion of that responsible message, so that individuals, when in any way, shape or form exposed to alcohol marketing, are able to make a considered judgment about the issues concerned with consumption of alcohol.
Stephen Kerr.
Presiding Officer, in last weekend's Sunday Post, the Justice Secretary announced a significant shift away from custodial sentences as part of the Government's efforts to reduce Scotland's prison population. Now, given the implications for victims, public safety and confidence in the justice system, why was this policy announced through a newspaper interview rather than to this Parliament? And does the First Minister accept that the answer to prison overcrowding is to provide sufficient prison capacity, not to send fewer offenders to prison?
First Minister.
I'm not sure that the article to which Mr Kerr refers in any way is a development of the Government policy. I think it's a statement of the Government's policy. So I don't think I'm very, very attuned to the importance of the Government setting out its policy positions to Parliament first, and that's exactly what we'll do. So, however, it is important that ministers are engaged in media interviews with representatives of the media. I'm sure we'd be criticised if we didn't do that. The Government has got to strike a balance about ensuring that the prison estate is safe for prisoners and for staff. We have also got to make sure that those who have committed significant and heinous crimes are incarcerated. Mr Kerr will be aware that we are seeing in current detail on the longer sentences being delivered because of the nature of crimes that are being committed. That is driving the prison population, and the Government has always had an interest and a policy priority of ensuring that community justice plays a part in the approaches that we take. And all of these elements are part of the wider delivery of Government policy on justice.
Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, my constituent is unable to secure an NHS prescription for tirzepatide, better known as Mounjaro, for weight management despite criteria approved by the Scottish Medicines Consortium in June 2024, indicating approval for restricted use, including the circumstances that impact my constituent. NHS Group Glasgow City Council does not include the treatment on its formulary for prescription for weight management, or not yet anyway. They say work is ongoing. Can I ask the First Minister whether they agree that 2 years after SMC approval is simply too long for health boards to add Mounjaro into their formulary so prescribing can be considered? And what action can the Scottish Government take to tackle this delay by health boards?
First Minister.
So individual health boards have got to respond to the judgments made by the Scottish Medicines Consortium. We would want that to be undertaken on a timely basis to ensure that individuals can have access to treatments that are deployed, and I will ask the Health Secretary to explore the steps being taken by Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board to ensure that the necessary urgency is being applied in this respect.
Craig Hoy.
Sir, the First Minister recently visited the White Sands in Dumfries, where, despite significant local opposition, work is underway on a controversial £70 million flood defence scheme. The community fears the impact on businesses, the environment, and has concerns about soaring costs amid reports of insufficient funds in Scottish Government flood defence funding. So will the First Minister confirm two things: that if this SNP-backed flood defence scheme, that his Government will not move the goalposts by capping or delaying its £55 million contribution? And will Mr Swinney me provide assurance that hard-pressed taxpayers in Dumfriesshire will not be asked to foot the bill if Cycle 1 of the National Flood Fund runs dry, or if the project experiences significant cost overruns?
First Minister.
The White Sands flooding scheme in Dumfries has been under consideration for many, many years, and I accept that there are divided opinions about this particular scheme. But equally, I've been in this Parliament long enough to hear members of Parliament from Dumfries come here to express concern and horror for their constituents when they get flooded by the flooding that takes place at the White Sands. And I have considerable experience of this in my own constituency. I know how terrible flooding is for members of the public. So I'm not actually sure what Mr Hoy wants. Does he want to just leave people vulnerable to flooding in their community? Is that what he wants? And because I think at some point, Mr Hoy, who's now the MSP for Dumfries, has got to decide, is he actually acting to protect his constituents, or is he just coming here to get another press release put out? It's not really how a responsible local member of Parliament should operate. Now, Mr Hoy also will realise that there are enormous challenges in construction projects just now because of external factors over which this government has absolutely no control, principally construction price inflation in relation to the which has arisen as a result of the war in Ukraine. These are legitimate factors that we'll work on in partnership with local authorities. What doesn't help is the constant haranguing from the miserablest on the Conservative benches who just come here to complain, offer no solutions, and no wonder there's hardly any of them left here any longer.
Angela Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It was to ask the First Minister, we have many homes in Scotland that are still using gas boilers, and they're very ineffective, as we know, but there are many oversized boiler systems and they have heat load issues and they're not set on the accurate settings. I wondered if you would consider optimising the present gas boiler systems in order to reduce carbon emissions and also lower costs for people across Scotland. To lower costs for people across Scotland by doing something fairly simple in the short term. Thank you.
First Minister. So part of the Government's approach in this respect is to move towards more sustainable heating solutions that will be good for the planet but also good for householders, so they have lower costs. So I'm agreed with Angela Ross that we need to get to a situation where we've got lower heating costs for householders. For the specifics about the configuration of gas boiler schemes, I have to say I'm not the world's expert today, but I will have the issues explored. But the point in principle I'd say to Angela Ross is the prevailing direction of government policy is to encourage a move to more sustainable heating solutions, and there is good progress being made in that, and that will obviously be reflected in the heating buildings legislation that the government brings forward.
Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the 7th of April, I attended a Community Council meeting in Newt Hill regarding the proposed solar farm development at Northfield on Biggar Road. Residents raised concerns about its proximity to housing and the cumulative impact of further developments in the area, including a proposed data centre. There are also concerns that Oaks Energy has provided misleading information about the project and its local impact. So does the First Minister agree that Scotland needs a clear energy strategy to guide such developments? And does he agree that developers must engage openly and honestly with communities so projects are developed with them rather than upon them?
First Minister.
I very much agree with the last point that Megan Gallagher made, that I think local dialogue on these projects is really important. I'm conscious of a number of very sensitive projects. I had one raised with me in a question time the other week there about an AI data centre, and I'm conscious of the concern that exists in local communities. So the point that Megan Gallagher makes about good, active and engaged local dialogue by developers is absolutely critical. Obviously, these issues have to be considered as part of the wider energy use of the energy generation measures that we take forward, and the Government, of course, has a very clear policy direction to support and encourage the development of renewable energy within Scotland.
Martin Day.
Thank you. The Scotland chair of the Federation of Small Businesses has warned that the increases we've seen in fuel and energy prices hit small businesses particularly hard because they do not have the buying power to smooth out price bumps or hedge prices. And they're calling on the UK Government to introduce a time-limited 5p cut to fuel duty while the higher prices remain. Does the FM agree that Westminster must act to protect businesses in Scotland, and can he provide any update on the Scottish Government's engagement with the UK Government on this issue?
First Minister.
So the Ministers wrote to the United Kingdom Government about the proposed 5p increase in fuel duty, which was due to take effect from September of this year. Thankfully, the Chancellor has indicated that that will not take its course. However, there remains a substantive issue that Mr Day raises, which is about the fact that many businesses and householders are paying very high costs for their energy in an energy-rich country. And my view on all of that is that we will receive much more benefit from Scotland's energy bounty if Scotland's energy is in Scotland's hands.
And Iris Dwayne.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As we stand here in this chamber, in my region, Sisters Against Cuts is pleading with this government to step in and stop the cuts to the Murray Initiative's Women's Service. This service provides essential support to survivors of gender-based violence and substance misuse, with service users fearing for what the future may hold. Therefore, does the First Minister agree with me that the loss of this service would be an immense loss to the protection of women and girls in Glasgow, and can he further commit to exploring funding options to retain these vital services?
First Minister.
I recognise the importance of services being provided to women and girls who are the victims of domestic violence and gender-based violence. The Government, through the Equally Safe programme, provides funding for a whole range of different projects around the country, and also provides support to local authorities to provide financial support to individual organisations. Now, I'll explore the specifics of the case that Iris Dwayne has put to me to ensure that any steps the Government can take will be taken to ensure the provision of effective services that meet the needs of women and girls who have to go through the horror of experiencing domestic violence or gender-based violence.
Thank you, First Minister. That concludes First Minister's questions, and apologies to the many members who I was unable to take today. The next item of business is a statement by Tom Arthur on Scottish Government investment in our Union Street and the People's Palace. Before we commence, we'll have a couple of minutes break to allow a change of positions in the front benches. Thank you.
Can I ask members to leave the chamber quietly, please? As has been said, our next item of business is a statement by Tom Arthur on Scottish Government investment in our Union Street and People's Place. So I call on Tom Arthur. Up to 10 minutes, please, Minister.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity to update Parliament on progress and further investment in two significant projects: our Union Street in Aberdeen and the People's Palace in Glasgow, both of which will support wider regeneration of their local communities. These commitments were set out in our manifesto and form part of our first 100-day commitments. I will be leading the statement, reflecting both on the Our Union Street project and, on behalf of the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Culture and Gaelic, the People's Palace commitment, which sits within the culture portfolio. While located in different cities, both projects play an important role in driving place-based regeneration and supporting the physical, economic and social renewal of local communities. Through our regeneration strategy and targeted investment programmes, we are supporting thriving places and regions which are central to Scotland's long-term economic success. This is reflected in our commitment of up to £52 million in the 2026-27 budget to accelerate regeneration across the country. Presiding Officer, I am pleased to confirm that the Scottish Government will provide up to an additional £600,000 for the Our Union Street campaign, building on our existing funding of £400,000. This will bring total investment of up to £1 million. This funding will complement wider Scottish Government investment in the North East, including £125 million over 10 years through the Aberdeen City Region deal and £13.4 million in regeneration capital investment since 2014. Union Street has long been the heart of Aberdeen, and like many towns and city centres, it has faced significant challenges in recent years. In response, local businesses and communities came together in 2023 to form Our Union Street, a volunteer-led movement aimed at tackling vacancies, improving streetscape, supporting new businesses and rebuilding civic pride. A defining feature of this initiative has been its strong community engagement. More than 70 local groups were engaged, with over 500 people attended a major public meeting, and more than 10,000 ideas were generated to help shape the future of the street. 3 years on, there has been a reduction of vacant units. With support from our £400,000 of investment to date, the project has delivered tangible outcomes, including shopfront improvements, cleaning and maintenance, volunteer mobilisation and stronger partnership working with local organisations and businesses. The Our Union Street team has worked closely with landlords and agents to bring vacant units back into use. Simple interventions, such as cleaning empty premises, have helped attract new tenants and created opportunities for new hospitality and commercial activity. There have also been visible improvements to the street itself, including exhibits and makeovers of vacant units that have drawn people back into the centre. I was particularly impressed by the efforts to work with local artists, including the Graffiti Grannies, a local street art group of over 60s, which has not only helped to tackle social isolation, but also reinvigorated their neighbourhoods with local art. Our investment has supported innovative digital solutions in reimagining the city, particularly the introduction of a smartphone app, which is helping people engage with the city centre in new ways. Launched last month, the app acts as a guide to local events, gives users exclusive deals at independent shops, and has interactive trails uncovering Aberdeen's lesser-known history and heritage. These are practical interventions that are making a real difference on the ground. Increased occupancy and footfall have helped reinforce confidence in the city centre as a place to live, work and invest. Presiding Officer, my officials have already met with the Our Union Street team and Aberdeen City Council to discuss delivery of this commitment, and we will ensure this additional funding builds on existing investment and momentum in revitalising the city centre. Crucially, the project can complement further action led by the Aberdeen-inspired Business Improvement District, another key player in driving the economic and cultural vibrancy of Aberdeen city centre through initiatives like the new Aberdeen Art Festival and biannual Aberdeen Restaurants Week. In parallel, initiatives such as the award-winning Upper Floors project, delivered by Aberdeen City Council and Aberdeen-inspired BID, are addressing long-standing challenges by converting underused upper floor spaces into homes, workplaces and creative hubs. Together, these efforts are helping to revitalise Union Street and breathe new life into Aberdeen's city centre. They reflect a town centre first approach that we are committed to supporting across Scotland. The work of Our Union Street is something others can look to and take learning from. Presiding Officer, this additional investment in Our Union Street is about more than physical change. It also sends a clear message that Aberdeen City Centre is open for business and committed to attracting investment, talent and new enterprises. It is about supporting communities, strengthening the local economy and fostering a strong sense of place. Our Union Street has already played a key role in that progress, and I look forward to seeing what more can be achieved next. Moving to the People's Palace and Winter Gardens, The project aims to save a cornerstone of Glasgow's cultural heritage. The People's Palace opened in 1898 at the iconic Glasgow Green with the pioneering vision to create a cultural, educational and recreational community space for the working class residents of the East End. At the heart of the People's Palace redevelopment project is an ambitious vision for the local communities in the East End of Glasgow. The project will use a community-led approach to create a museum by the people, for the people. Inclusion, access and participation will be increased through this approach, and the project will focus on local and national priorities, including supporting learning, well-being, skills development and net zero. It will reimagine the People's Palace to create one of the world's most socially engaged and internationally significant local museums. The restoration project will also demonstrate the benefits of reusing and adapting historic buildings to ensure that they can thrive again and support the well-being of Scotland's people and the economy. A significantly improved and accessible cultural venue will also make the local area a better place to live and will support local businesses and jobs. It will create new employment opportunities during the redevelopment and beyond. The project aims to build on the success of the redeveloped Borough Collection, which generated over £21 million in economic value in its first year of reopening and almost £25 million in its second year. It is clear that the renewed People's Palace will play a pivotal placemaking role in one of Glasgow's most deprived neighbourhoods. However, the Grade A listed museum is now at risk of permanent closure. But we must ensure this does not happen, which is why I am pleased to confirm that the Scottish Government will establish a partnership group to support the redevelopment of the People's Palace, recognising its status as a building of national cultural and historic significance and its role in the regeneration of Glasgow's East End. This group will bring together key partners, including Historic Environment Scotland, the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Glasgow Life, Museum Galleries Scotland and Scottish Enterprise, alongside wider sectoral expertise, to work collaboratively with Glasgow City Council in progressing the refurbishment of the People's Palace and Winter Gardens. The partnership group will facilitate the sharing of expertise, support the achievement of value for money for the public purse, and seek to agree a viable and deliverable funding package, including appropriate match funding arrangements. Presiding Officer, investing in our Union Street and the People's Palace demonstrates our clear commitment to regeneration that is locally led, nationally supported and focused on delivering real change. By investing in our places, we are investing in people, opportunity and long-term prosperity. I am confident that together we will continue to build stronger, more resilient communities across Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We will now have questions, and I intend to allow about 20 minutes for questions, after which we must move to next item of business. So it would be helpful if members could press the request to speak buttons if they wish to ask a question. And I call Thomas Kerr.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I draw members to my register of interest as a sitting councillor in Glasgow City Council? Can I start by thanking the Minister for advance sight of his statement, and I'll be focusing my question on the People's Palace in Glasgow. Now, we in these benches welcome this announcement, although as a Glaswegian I regret it has taken so long. The images that we seen leaked a few years ago of inside the Winter Gardens was devastating for Glaswegians. This museum is a pillar of working class history and heritage for our city and is vital. So can I ask the Minister if in this announced partnership group that the local community will be involved, particularly the hard-working and dedicated local activists from the Friends of People's Palace and Winter Gardens? And lastly, unless I'm mistaken, there is no solid announcement of funding, but then we don't have by-election coming up in Glasgow. So will he tell Glasgow how much this government will cough up and to help with this redevelopment go forward?
Minister.
Can I thank the member for his question? I would want to highlight that the commitment in Aberdeen was a manifesto commitment. Just to put that on the record to avoid any dubiety or misunderstandings that members may innocently stray into. But I do welcome his question, recognising the importance of the People's Palace in Winter Garden and recognise that it is cherished by not just many across the East End of Glasgow, but many across Scotland. Indeed, many people here will have memories in their childhood of visiting it as part perhaps of a school outing. The two central points with regards to the funding that the Scottish Government will bring forward and indeed securing ongoing community engagement. I want to be clear that this has to be community-led, and I sought to reflect that in my statement. So I want to ensure the work of the partnership group that we bring together complements that, provides that national support for something that is community-led, and I am open to all suggestions from members to ensure that the voices of communities are led. Too often communities, particularly those in places like the East End of Glasgow, had things done to them, not with them. This is their People's Palace, and I want to make sure that their voices aren't just heard, but are integral into what comes next. With regards to funding, of course, there has been challenges, and that has been covered in the media and has been recognised. What I want us to be able to do is to sit down and work with a range of partners, recognising that there are many shared interests and funders, to identify an appropriate funding package to make sure that this can be delivered. And with regards to the commitments from the Scottish Government, I will endeavour to keep Parliament up to date.
Thank you, Minister. I call Michael Mara to be followed by Jack Middleton.
Thank you, President Officer. I welcome the hard work that our Union Street are doing to re-energise Union Street in the centre of Aberdeen. And they are working, along with partners, to bring together a shared vision of the future of the city centre. Can the Scottish Government say a little bit more today about how they will help assist in the funding of that regeneration and actually the delivery of the shared vision that these partners are developing?
Minister.
Well, can I thank Mr Mara for his question, and I would join him in recognising the hard work of all those involved in our Union Street. We have today committed 400,000. This is now an additional commitment of up to an additional 600,000, so up to £1 million in total. My officials, as I touched on in my statement, have already met with local partners, and we will continue to engage. And it's a reflection I have from having rejoined the regeneration portfolio, but having previously covered it. What is of the utmost importance is not what ministers or necessarily even what we think in this place should happen. It's about utilising that expertise of local communities. And I think when you look at our Union Street as a model, with the partners involved, Chambers, BID, that is, I think, integral to the success of this project. And we see that in other examples elsewhere in Scotland of successful regeneration. What is at the heart of it are those community voices, those business voices as well. So I want to ensure that we're not just focused upon the quantum funding, but also in maximising the impact. And that's about ensuring that we work constructively with local partners to ensure every pound that is invested has the maximum impact. And that will be achieved by having that close, ongoing engagement on the ground. But again, happy to keep members updated, indeed to engage with any members who want to discuss the matter further.
I'll call Jack Middleton to be followed by Maggie Chapman.
For too long, Aberdeen has paid the price for Westminster mismanagement of our energy industry. My constituency is the energy capital of Europe. It should look and feel like it. So I welcome this significant SNP regeneration package for Union Street. But can the Minister outline for me today the wider benefits he hopes it delivers in terms of high street football and Aberdeen's wider economy?
Minister.
Can I thank Mr Middleton for his question? The benefits that will be conferred by this are significant. They're significant in and of themselves because they can have an immediate impact simply by improving the appearance of an area. For example, dressing a shopfront can significantly change attitudes and perceptions. Simple, small interventions like such as that, can be impactful, for example, in catalysing investment. And I highlighted some of these small interventions in my remarks: the shopfront improvements, cleaning and maintenance of the street, and the digital innovation as well. All of that cumulatively can help to boost confidence, but it creates a multiplier effect, because when one shop becomes occupied and starts trading, that acts as a catalyst for shops next door to become occupied. It draws more people into the centre, and indeed can help to encourage more residents to move into the centre as well. So this investment over the last few years, working in partnership, is having that positive impact, and we're keen to accelerate it, which is why we're going to provide that additional investment of up to an additional £600,000.
Maggie Chapman to be followed by Liam Kerr.
Thank you, and I thank the Minister for his statement.
This welcome investment in our Union Street should not simply regenerate buildings, but must empower communities and ensure the wealth created by Union Street's revival is retained locally for the benefit of the people of Aberdeen. Will the Minister commit to ensuring that this investment in our Union Street is accompanied by practical support for community asset transfers, cooperative enterprise and social economy initiatives, so that the town centre first approach delivers not only physical regeneration but also democratic ownership and community wealth building in the heart of the city?
Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for a question? She raises very important points. I think one of the lessons of regenerations in previous decades has been that while it's possible to come in with significant capital investment to improve infrastructure and buildings, if there's not accompanying work to go and rewire the local economies, sometimes we can find ourselves 10, 15, 20 years later back at square one. So regeneration has to be about more than just coming in and improving the facade and appearance of an area. It has to be something that is sustainable. And the points that were made with regards to the retention of the wealth that's generated within a place, staying within a place, are absolutely crucial to that. Now, this is Scotland Loves Local Week. And those small local businesses that will be populating Union Street and many other high streets the length and breadth of Scotland, we know that disproportionately they employ locally, they procure locally, and as such the wealth that they generate remains within the community. So an initiative such as this, working in partnership, and particularly with the involvement of the Business Improvement District, I think is absolutely consistent with community wealth building. And of course, we now have community wealth building on the statute book and can look forward to its implementation over the course of this parliamentary session.
I call Liam Kerr to be followed by UP Chow-Turvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, the deeply cynical timing of this statement, re-announcing money promised months ago, £400,000 of which is repackaged from 3 years ago, 2 days before the Aberdeen South by-election, will fool absolutely no one. Because we all know that it's because the SNP are hearing on the doors that it's the Scottish Conservatives who stand against the SNP's catastrophic presumption against oil and gas, who found £10 million for Tory rack victims, and who defend the people of Aberdeen against the disastrous LEZ and busgates. But, Minister, the chair of our Union Street, Bob Keeler, has argued that the SNP's sky-high business rates regime is a significant obstacle to Union Street's regeneration. Does the Minister agree? And if so, what concrete action will he actually take?
Minister.
I don't know if the the member misheard me. Maybe I'm surprised. Just in case he missed it, we've announced investment into Aberdeen today, and additional investment that's up to £1 million from the SNP Scottish Government into the centre of Aberdeen. Let me say that again. I don't think he caught it the first time. Up to £1 million of investment into the centre of Aberdeen from the SNP Scottish Government. He could at least throw some cheer and support that.
Absolutely. I call UP. Thank you, members. Can I call UP Chow-Turvey, followed by Jackie Dunbar?
Thank you. I thank the Minister for the advanced side of this statement. Union Street is vital to the local economy of Aberdeen and the wider north-east of region. And we wanted to see it full of life once more, that the granite shine. I do welcome the government's announcement of the investment. But I do agree with Mr. Kerr. We have to ensure that it does not become too expensive to remain on Union Street and in all of our high streets, which is why we need an action on non-business rates and build on the rate relief that the Liberal Democrats secured in the last Parliament. Can I therefore ask the Minister if the Scottish Government will look to reform business rates to ensure shops and businesses have a secure future?
Minister.
The member raises a very important point around non-domestic rates, and in fairness, Mr Kerr did so as well. What I would say is that we recognise some of the challenges that have arisen following the revaluation, and that was reflected in the package of reliefs that were brought forward as part of the budget process. I think, from memory, that package now totals in excess of £870 million. That's an £870 million tax cut from this government to businesses. But we recognise there's more work to do, so we're committed to engaging constructively, including that process of reviewing our rate system. And of course, it is open to all members ahead of the annual budget process to make representations to the Scottish Government on these matters.
Thank you. I call Jackie DeBar to be followed by Duncan Massey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Folk tend to go into city centres not because they're city centres, but because of the businesses that occupy them and the events that happen there. So can the Minister share how the Scottish Government is supporting Aberdeen to tell the story of Union Street and what's happening in the city centre? Minister.
This is a really, really important point that Jackie Dunbar raises. And it's about, in terms of how we utilise retail, how we utilise hospitality. Yes, on a day-to-day basis, there can be a functional element. You need to pop out for a pint of milk and a loaf of bread, so you go into the shop and you buy it. But there's also the experiential element, and that's the range of shops, particularly if they're unique shops specific to a place. It's about the environment, it's about the interaction of the retail, hospitality offering. And that is extremely important. But the other aspect as well is the intangible heritage, the cultural history, the stories of a particular place. And that's why community-led regeneration is so important, because they bring these stories and that shared experience to bear in shaping projects around regeneration. And if we just take one example of what our Union Street team have been involved in, is the Our Aberdeen app, which is an innovative digital tool that has helped to engage the community and showcase the wide range of activity happening across the city centre. So that's a really outstanding example of marrying contemporary technology and a digital app to enable people to fully explore the heritage of an area and also to identify the fantastic range of shops and services that are on offer.
Thank you. Duncan Massey to be followed by Don Black.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would just firstly draw members to my register of interests as a member of Aberdeen City Council. And yes, I am pleased to see the Scottish Government supporting the Our Union Street campaign in Aberdeen. Our Union Street is a tremendous community-led organisation which has become really essential in helping to regenerate and reinvigorate Aberdeen City, but especially as we've seen the backdrop of the downturn in the oil industry, but also many negative footfall impacts from SNP policies such as the LEZ zone and bus gates. But in particular, my understanding is that the SNP manifesto specifically promised 600k extra funding specifically, but this statement seems to water that down somewhat by suggesting that the funding...
Can we have a question, please?
Yes, the funding is only up to 600k. Can the Minister confirm that Our Union Street will get the full 600k, or does the Minister see this as a contingent number? And if so, what is the contingency based on?
Minister.
For the avoidance of doubt, the total investment is up to £1 million. Well, that will of course be determined by engagement with our Union Street and ensuring there's an effective systems in place for project management, ensuring that the money has the maximum impact. But that is what we have committed to, and it's what we're committed to delivering, that up to £1 million total investment. That's what's on the table for the Our Union Street campaign.
Paul John Black to be followed by Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the Scottish Government's ongoing support for the regeneration of Aberdeen and the North East. Does the Minister share my view that community-led regeneration initiatives like our Union Street campaign demonstrate the power of local people to shape the future of their neighbourhoods and that they deserve our full backing both here and elsewhere?
Absolutely, I concur entirely with Don Black. It's a really powerful point that cannot be stressed enough, is the importance of community-led regeneration. Empowering communities, giving them that national support, that is a fundamentally different approach to what prevailed in decades past, where things were done to communities. And it's not just good in terms of being able to engage communities in the here and now, it leads to better outcomes. No one knows their places as well as the people who live there. And by harnessing that expertise, as the Our Union Street campaign is doing, is leading to the excellent tangible results that we're seeing.
Can I remind members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak buttons now. Call Paul Sweeney to be followed by Claire Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In 1898, when the People's Palace was opened, it was declared open to the people for ever and ever, but sadly it's been closed for 2 years now, and I do pay tribute to the Friends of the People's Palace who have kept the spirit of it alive, particularly the pioneering curator, Dr Elspeth King, who passed away in November. We've been waiting 2 years, Minister, and it was due to reopen next year. But a 12 million funding gap that the Scottish Government refused to fill has left the project stalled indefinitely. During the election, the SNP promised Glasgow all the funding it needed to complete the restoration, but now the votes are counted. That promise seems to have shrunk to get another partnership group, with no sign of the remaining 12 million capital funding that Glasgow City Council needs to get the restoration project underway. So can the Minister guarantee this won't be just another talking shop that covers for more delays? And can you upgrade the appropriate match funding to a guarantee that all necessary capital funding will be found, and set a firm reopening date for this key Glasgow cultural institution that has been largely closed to the public for nearly a decade now?
Minister.
Well, I thank the member for his question and would recognise his significant and long-standing interest in this area. And he is right to draw attention to what was promised when People's Palace was opened in 1898. And that is a commitment that we have a collective responsibility to keep. So I would want to assure them that there is no watering down. What I want to do is to ensure that we are working collaboratively, recognising there's a range of partners involved, most importantly the local community in the delivery of this project, but also a range of funders as well. So I recognise the member's interest in this, and I'm happy to engage with him closely on it, but I want to assure him of the Scottish Government's commitment to working constructively with partners to ensure that the Palace and the Winter Gardens is reopened.
I call Claire Hockey to be followed by Iris Dwayne.
Thank you, President Officer. In the 1970s, the then Labour's Glasgow City Council proposed demolishing the People's Palace building to put in a motorway. Potential historic vandalism of epic proportions. And this was then followed by decades of the Labour Council not adequately investing in the building or the Winter Gardens, allowing one of the most precious buildings in Glasgow to go to wreck and ruin. So I welcome this Minister's statement and commitment to forming a partnership group to ensure the survival of the People's Palace.
Can we have a question?
Certainly. Can the Minister assure my constituents and the people of Glasgow that the People's Palace will reopen and give a timescale for this work to be completed?
Well, I do want to give that assurance to Claire Hockey and to her constituents of the Scottish Government's commitment. I'm not in a position to go and give a definitive timescale for reopening, but naturally I would want that to be as quickly as practically possible. Claire Hockey also highlights to the Chamber another important point, and that is the value of learning the lessons from history, particularly in the post-war era, where we saw many treasures in our architectural heritage, and not just in Glasgow, but more widely across Scotland, lost to post-war planning. And that is a mistake we must never repeat. People's Palace or Winter Gardens is a treasure. It's a national asset as well as an asset for the East End of Glasgow, and we have to work constructively and collaboratively to save it, and that is what the Scottish Government is going to do in partnership.
Hoping to squeeze in 2 more questions. Can I call Iris Dwayne to be followed by Colm Merrick?
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'd like to thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement before this debate. I also share the concerns of my fellow regional MSPs when it comes down to talk about funding, but I'm thankful that you've recognised the People's Palace as a cultural icon in Glasgow. It's quite disappointing, however, to hear that the Scottish Government is only using convening powers which it could have and should have used before now. Can the Minister confirm whether or not funding from the Scottish Government will be forthright as part of this collaborative package that he speaks of? And in the scenario where a funding partner is not found, that they are willing to shoulder the cost? Thank you.
Minister.
I appreciate the question that the member raises. What I want to provide as assurance on is the Government's commitment to working constructively towards the reopening of the Palace and Winter Gardens. I don't want to preempt where these discussions will lead to and the specific funding package that will be brought together, and that can include elements of match funding as well. But we are committed to working constructively. I have come to the Chamber proactively to make a statement in the back of a manifesto commitment and the Government's commitment to working for the reopening of the People's Palace. So I hope that provides the member with reassurance. And again, as these discussions progress, I'm happy to keep members updated, and indeed the wider Chamber, should it be so interested, on the nature of these discussions and the progress we're making, including specifically about the financing of the project.
Colin Merrick.
Like many across Glasgow will be today, I'm delighted to welcome the support for the People's Palace. As its name suggests, the People's Palace has always been at the centre of the community and holds a special place in the hearts of Glaswegians. Therefore, can the Minister say what assurances the Scottish Government can provide to Glaswegians that their voice will be at the heart of these plans to ensure it has a sustainable, inclusive and accessible future for generations to come?
Minister.
Yeah, I touched on, and thank Mr Merrick for his question, and I think I've covered some of these points in previous answers, but I would just note that community voices have been central to shaping the project, with more than 6,300 people contributing their views, stories and lived experiences. And this extensive engagement has directly informed the refurbishment designs, ensuring the museum will reflect the diversity and identity of the city. So this is a very significant project, but I would reiterate again the Government's commitment not just to working with partners to deliver it, but ensuring that it reflects the priorities and views and values of the people who live in the area too.
That concludes questions on the Minister's statement. We now move to a debate on motion 356 in the name of Shirley-Ann Somerville on strengthening Scotland's partnership with the third sector. I invite all members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now. I call Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the motion in my name. Presiding Officer, last week I had the privilege of attending the SCVO Scottish Charity Awards, and the positive impact of the third sector and the incredible people within it was on display once again that night, as it is in every community, every day, right across Scotland. Their work, their volunteering changes lives, strengthens communities and provides support to people where and when they need it most. But to be clear, for this support to continue, a sustainable, thriving and independent third sector is essential. And it is on that note that we will be supporting the Liberal Democrats, Scottish Greens and Labour amendments today. Presiding Officer, the third sector works across a huge number of policy areas, from healthcare to education, to reducing the impact of child poverty and advancing climate action. As one of our key partners, it directly contributes to the Government's 4 missions. What sets the third sector apart is its deep knowledge of communities, making it uniquely placed to identify and deliver real solutions. This knowledge cannot be replicated by any government, national or local. This Government recognises that to tackle the biggest challenges of the day, we need to work in partnership with the sector. Not only that, but we have a responsibility to protect the independence of the sector and respect the remarkable work of these organisations. The Government fully supports the rights of charities to campaign on behalf of those they represent and influence changes in policy, regardless of their funding status. Questioning the integrity of the third sector erodes trust and harms communities at a time when community support could not be more important. To this end, the Government will formalise the relationship to demonstrate the value we place in the third sector, not simply as service providers, but as partners in shaping, informing and delivering. Presiding Officer, this ambition forms the foundations of our third sector partnership agreement. Now, it is important to recognise that the support for the third sector is not new for the Government. Over the course of the last Parliament, the previous Government took meaningful steps to strengthen and support the sector. Most significantly, our ongoing commitment to fairer funding. It delivered significant progress to embed multi-year funding across government, supporting organisations as diverse as Scottish Mountain Rescue, a number of disabled people's organisations and Apex Scotland, to name but a few. I certainly will.
Stephen Kerr.
I've been thinking about what the Cabinet Secretary just said about questioning the integrity. Now, I'm assuming that she doesn't mean that it's inappropriate for us as members of the Scottish Parliament to question public funds that are received by third sector bodies and charities, and what they're doing with those monies, and whether or not they're delivering the outcomes that the funds are expended on the basis of expecting. I'm assuming she doesn't mean that, because otherwise she's trying to tie the hands of Parliament as we do our business of scrutinising the work of third sector organisations.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm certainly not suggesting that people shouldn't question the third sector or indeed the Scottish Government on the funding that we give the third sector. What I am saying is that there will be third sector organisations that welcome Scottish Government priorities. There will be some who don't think we go far enough. There will be some who think we go too far. And there will be some who disagree with us entirely. And that is utterly appropriate and, in fact, a valuable and commendable part of the system that we have in Parliament, and I think a helpful use for all politicians, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, as I recognise the multi-year funding alone does not make for a sustainable sector, and many organisations have uncertainty and delays to funding, and those do have impacts on service delivery and staffing decisions ahead of financial years. Now, while this is not an issue wholly reserved to the Scottish Government, it is a priority area for improvement. This past financial year, despite a compressed timetable, we worked to ensure as many organisations as possible received their funding decisions early. These improvements have been recognised by the sector, with feedback that the action taken showed a strong care for the system as a whole. But we know we need to go further. Presiding Officer, we also know that at the heart of the third sector are its volunteers. The first week in June marked Volunteers Week, a chance to celebrate the extraordinary contribution of volunteers across Scotland. Volunteers, including trustees, are the backbone of Scotland's third sector, and many of the activities and support we rely on would simply not exist without them. I'm delighted to highlight that through the £2.2 million Volunteering Support Fund, we are helping 116 organisations grow and diversify their volunteer base. Presiding Officer, alongside fairer funding and volunteering, significant steps were taken to strengthen the framework which the sector operates within. The Charities Regulation Administration Scotland Act 2023 is now fully commenced, and this updated legislation improves the public's access to information about a charity's operations, provides stronger powers to the Scottish Charity Regulator, and aligns Scottish charity law more closely with charity regulation elsewhere in the UK. Together, these actions demonstrate the clear commitment to supporting the third sector to deliver for Scotland. Presiding Officer, successful collaboration between government, local authorities and the third sector is delivering real change. Collaboration is central to eradicating child poverty, a defining mission of this government, and not one which we can deliver alone. Through the new £20 million Whole Family Support Third Sector Delivery Fund, this government will enable third sector organisations to deliver holistic wraparound services for families experiencing or at risk of poverty. Applications to the fund are being assessed currently, and I look forward to announcing the successful applicants in the coming weeks. Subject to the agreement with the successful organisations, it is my expectation that the funding will move to a multi-year basis. Presiding Officer, this collaboration approach speaks directly and aligns with the Government's ambition on public service reform, which will empower those working in frontline services to deliver for people. The Cabinet Secretary for Public Service Reform set out last week this Government's vision for more effective person-centred services. The third sector is central to achieving this. As members have highlighted, and further work is needed across government, funders and commissioners to ensure that funding, procurement and policy approaches truly enable organisations to thrive within an integrated system.
David Linden.
Very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way, and I draw attention to my register of interest. Until last month, I was the chair of Cranhill Development Trust. On the point that the Cabinet Secretary is referencing, I very much welcome any moves that we can to try and reduce bureaucracy for quite a lot of these small organisations, such as Cranhill Development Trust, which I just referenced. What we want to see more often than not is people being able to get on with the job rather than having to spend huge amounts of time doing form filling when it comes to applying for grants, and then also doing the analysis after it. So I welcome what the Government said and look forward to seeing that being borne out. That will be very welcome indeed.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, David Linden mentions a very important point, particularly for smaller organisations, but not just for smaller organisations. That's about letting them get on with the job with appropriate reporting and analysis as part of that work, but not becoming overburdensome and preventing them from getting on with that very important job. So I would very much agree with the sentiment behind his remarks. I welcome the fact that the Cabinet Secretary for Public Service Reform will shortly meet with SCVO to explore opportunities around public service reform, and the Partnership and Public Service Reform Programme will align together to strengthen collaboration. And I also welcome the fact that other charities have proactively reached out to him, demonstrating once again the sector's readiness to innovate for the benefit of all those we are here to serve. Presiding Officer, alongside this progress, I must make clear the importance of listening to the concerns shared by the sector. We have repeatedly heard that the current system is unsustainable. The demand for services continues to increase, alongside challenging financial pressures, which are worsened by costs such as the UK Government's decision to hike employer national insurance contributions and the pressure this places on employees and volunteers. We recognise that this Government has a shared responsibility with the sector and other third sector funders to not only deliver services but to strengthen the foundations upon which delivery relies. In February, I announced my intention to co-design a third sector partnership agreement, and following a strong endorsement of this vision in the recent election, I am delighted to take this work forward, ultimately creating a strategic partnership of equals. Importantly, this partnership will include the whole sector, not only reaching organisations with a direct funding relationship with government. Work is at an early stage, but we have begun to identify key themes which will shape the first phase of this engagement. And these themes will not dictate the outcome, but instead provide a baseline for open, meaningful and collaborative discussion. Firstly, developing a partnership of equals. As I've emphasised, we want the third sector to actively inform and shape policy development. This means supporting transparency, knowledge sharing and embedding a culture within government that values the contribution of the sector. Second, supporting a strong and an independent sector, exploring governance, leadership and workforce resilience to ensure the sector is equipped to meet future challenges with an effective regulatory environment. Third, improving financial sustainability. The fiscal environment continues to place significant pressures on the sector and is recognised as a key driver of instability. And we will encourage honest conversations about these challenges, identify opportunities for improvement and build on our fairer funding approach. We do have to bear in mind as we move forward, however, that this Government does not receive multi-year funding budgets itself, and providing multi-year grants for any organisation, including those in the third sector, does take away flexibility for the remainder of budgets, and I would ask members to bear that in mind as they move through budgetary discussions, if at the same time they are requesting further multi-year settlements. I'll give way to Murdo Fraser.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way on that specific point, and she will know that is the number one ask from the sector for multi-year funding. But although she's technically correct in saying the Scottish Government's funding is not multi-year in terms of the block grant for Westminster, we know that 95% more is. We know what the quantum is going to be year to year. It can be predicted. So surely there is more scope to give the third sector greater clarity about multi-year funding going forward.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, that's exactly why we've been moving forward with a greater level of multi-year funding, because we are trying to provide that. But Murdo Fraser knows well, he has gone through enough budgetary rounds to know the fact that there are always changes to what happens between the UK Government's decisions in the UK budget, and that's why we have to wait on the Scottish Government budget, this UK Government budget to be passed, so that we know what's happening with the Scottish Government. So there are intrinsic links there that we can't get away with. But I say that to demonstrate the context, not to use it as an excuse not to deliver on further multi-year funding, which is definitely the direction of travel which the Government wishes to go on. Finally, Presiding Officer, ensuring accountability at all levels within the partnership is another important piece of the framework. We will work with the sector to develop appropriate monitoring and evaluation to tie into the point that David Linden mentioned earlier on, so that the delivery of the partnership is embedded across government and the third sector. I am also committed to ensuring that voices from across the sector contribute to shaping a partnership rooted in trust and respect, which supports the long-term sustainability of the sector, and drives better outcomes. Presiding Officer, I hear calls from some to give partnership a statutory footing akin to the Welsh third sector scheme. I'm also aware of the calls from the third sector in Wales to review that scheme, and I think we have an opportunity to learn from the Welsh approach and work with the sector to explore what works best for Scotland. Whilst I will not take it off the table, I would suggest that a statutory footing is not always the most effective approach, and more work is needed to get this right. Legislation is both time and resource intensive, and Parliament would rightly expect us to continue progressing third sector policies such as charity law, volunteering and the fairer funding. And I would not want the development of legislation within the area of the framework to impede any of the wider work that the Government intends to take forward to support the third sector. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, a sustainable and thriving third sector benefits us all. It benefits the workforce, it benefits the people of Scotland, and it benefits this Government through stronger delivery, better outcomes and more resilient communities. And that's why the development of the partnership is such an important way to demonstrate and implement our support for the third sector right across Scotland in every community. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Can I remind those who wish to move amendments or speak in the debate to press the request to speak button? I call Julie McDougall to be followed by Carol Malcolm.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. So I just wish to declare an interest as a trustee of the John McDougall Mesothelioma Trust and Glenrothes and Area Heritage Centre, and thank the Minister for her comments. As a Fife councillor, I am all too aware of the work people in the third sector do, much of it unpaid, to step in where council budgets and personnel have unfortunately been stretched too thinly. I think everyone in this chamber agrees that third sector providers become vital lifelines in many communities, and because of this, we all want to do the right thing in supporting them. The reason I've chosen to move my amendment today is because I hope to work with the Government constructively on this important issue, as too much is at stake for this to be the usual sort of punch and duty politics of previous sessions. My feedback rests on three main points. So, firstly, the future structure and framework, which has been touched upon, of any proposed funding model. And secondly, the role of local government. And finally, the expectations that we have for the third sector. So, on my first point, I truly believe that no problem can be solved simply by throwing money at it. So although more money is of course welcome for anyone who receives it, the way in which the money is given and the conditions imposed clearly have massive ramifications on service delivery. So speaking to colleges and other organisations who are dependent on public funding across my region has been a massive eye-opener to me. A big problem I've noticed across most government funding projects is that they do lose sight of the issues they hope to address. As an example, I raised recently to the First Minister was the fact that although colleges and employers do indeed receive funding from the Scottish Government, they were structured in such a way that disincentivised the creation of new apprenticeships and didn't guarantee the long-term security of some campuses that are at risk of closing. The point that I tried to make then, which the First Minister either didn't pick up or refused to answer, wasn't that the sector needed more money by itself. It's that the funding structure of how the money was spent was completely at odds for the needs of the college sector and the skills development in Scotland. So in short, it's all about priorities. I welcome the mention that the Scottish Government will consider multi-year funding as a minimum standard, as advocated by organisations like Citizens Advice, so that they can actually plan services for years ahead and not simply crossing fingers at the end of every Scottish or local government budget. But we also need to be aware of the vital roles that our councils play in the execution and the funding of these services. So many of us in the Chamber either have served or continue to serve on councils in our respective areas, and we all know that constituents we represent come from communities which have different priorities and different needs, and that different council areas or even neighbouring wards. Too often many policies are ring-fenced. The funding which comes from the government is then cannot ignore it, needs to be bespoke to the needs of different council areas. Some councils are indeed forced to use certain government funding on areas which for them are unneeded, yet they have an entire service areas which are literally dying for essential cash. So duplicating funding and service provision is too common a problem when it comes to this, and therefore we must ensure that our councils and third sector providers can properly coordinate funding and activities to streamline our service delivery. I would therefore argue that this isn't just a discussion that takes place between the Scottish Government and one collective body or sector, but all 32 of Scotland's councils need their own unique input on how future funding can best be used in their communities. This especially emphasises my point about the longevity of third sector providers. We can't have a situation where communities are wholly reliant on those services and only for government money to dry up and councils not being able to fund them. So my final point before I wind up is having realistic conversations about what we expect from our third sector. Much of the third sector prides itself on the unique way it delivers its services, and it's a major part of their appeal and why they can be favoured over similar services offered by other public bodies. However, I feel we're moving to a point where third sector providers are becoming a permanent and necessary appendage of local service offerings and not just a welcome addition. I believe a deeper conversation needs to be had on this, and itself will change the relationship we all have with the third sector, which is hopefully one that we can have not too far from today's discussions. I would say that there should be a commitment by every organisation in receipt of government funding to demonstrate full value for money and ensuring that their presence can represent an overall saving on public investment. In closing, Presiding Officer, I will put forward my amendment as an open hand to all members in this chamber to engage in more forward thinking when it comes to supporting the third sector. We all value them, some of us have needed them, and we on the reform benches are certainly not opposed to funding them where they can fill a genuine gap in local public services. However, we can't just keep going down the same path of fund first, worry about sustainability later. Sustainability needs to be baked into the funding from the very start, not just from another bumper plate slogan attached to an obscure policy memorandum. We must prove to the public that we can do things differently and that we can work constructively together on this issue and that we are listening to them. That is why I hope that you can support my amendment today. Thank you.
I call on Carol Mockin to speak to and move Amendment 356.1 to be followed by Holyrood. Ms Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'll start by moving the amendment in my name. Today's debate on Scotland's partnership with the third sector is welcome, and I hope that today we can have an open and collaborative discussion on the best approach to strengthen Scotland's partnership with a sector that is so vital to the economy and society. The third sector is at the forefront of efforts to tackle poverty, build social cohesion and protect the environment. From grassroots groups to health and social care organisations, communities depend on the sector for support and advice. These charities and organisations can make a real and lasting difference to families and individuals right across Scotland, and they deserve the respect to be respected and to be seen for the contribution that they do provide. Scottish Labour welcomes the Government's motion and its commitment to establish a third sector partnership agreement. Formalising the relationship between the third sector and the Government is something that really is long overdue. Scotland is actually the only part of the UK to not have an established formal partnership with the voluntary sector. And while the approaches taken in Wales, Northern Ireland and the UK are all different, it was really welcome to hear the Cabinet Secretary speak about the Welsh, because our point was that we hoped that we could learn lessons from some of these agreements, and that might help us take forward some of the points that we want to do. This agreement presents an opportunity to reset the relationship, align priorities and deliver on some of the sector's long-term asks, such as calls to introduce multi-year funding arrangements, as we've all touched on. And this is why Scottish Labour have lodged an add-on amendment which makes clear that multi-year funding should be foundational to the agreement. Not only will multi-year funding provide more certainty for the sector and allow for better planning, but also allows charities and organisations to take preventative measures while providing added long-term savings, such as reducing the cost of having to apply for single-year funding. I think we all recognise that. This is something that the sector has repeatedly asked for, and I hope that the Government will agree the delivery on this should be a top priority and essential within the agreement. Our amendment also asks that greater due diligence on fair work principles is embedded in that framework, and we have discussed that in the last session. Given the precariousness of third sector funding, workers often face shorter contracts and have less job security. If we're serious about strengthening the Government's relationship with the sector, then consideration of workers' rights, job protection and proper pay and conditions must be at the forefront of this. And I know the Cabinet Secretary accepts that point, and so we on these benches will do what we can to work with them on that. I guess this is also why it's crucial that the third sector are really involved in the co-design of the agreement, and I welcome the commitment made in the Cabinet Secretary's motion today that ensures stakeholders are involved and not omitted from that design process. Currently, some experiences from within the sector tell us that organisations can often feel that they don't have a strong relationship with public bodies, and sometimes the experiences aren't positive. Reflecting on the Government's public service reform agenda debate last week, we do know that the Government believe the third sector will be key to this work, so that working together is essential. Mutual respect and shared recognition must be at the forefront of the partnership agreement. And again, I really welcome the Government and the Cabinet Secretary's commitment to including that third sector in the co-design process. Of course, Presiding Officer, as with anything, the detail and delivery of the partnership will be fundamental to its success. The partnership must be supported with clear accountability mechanisms, and strong leadership must be at the forefront to drive ambitions and delivery. And so that's today. I have heard some of that, Cabinet Secretary, so I hope that we can work together on this. Key asks from the sector include ensuring that a clear timetable and roadmap for developing and implementing the agreement are set out, with clear lines of accountability within the Scottish Government. There's also a question about who will be subject to the agreement and how smaller independent organisations are represented and heard. And I heard that in Health Committee with some of the third sector organisations, and it is my experience as a member that some of those smaller organisations do punch above their weight, if you like, and we need to include them. We have raised in the past public funds distributed to the third sector. Are they used effectively? How do we ensure that locally charities are prioritised, perhaps rather than always national charities or lobbying groups? And perhaps the Cabinet Secretary or the Minister can provide more detail on this in the closing remarks. Just how do we make sure that we focus on those grassroots organisations who are right at the front line? I welcome the Government's thoughts on how we really engage out with the larger groups that we normally engage with. The Liberal Democrats' amendment refers to the fact that smaller charities can find it more difficult, and so Scottish Labour will be supporting that amendment today, as we really do agree that often some of these smaller grassroots organisations can miss out on funding. And we need to be clear, is this because of the time and effort that it requires to repeatedly apply, or is it because some of the larger organisations are just sometimes favoured? We need to understand that. I would like, again, to welcome the Government's motion and the commitment to the third sector today. The real sort of precarious and short-term funding that the sector has faced and have criticised the Parliament for, we know that in this motion and in many of the amendments we can look to that more financially sustainable approach. The third sector organisations, as others have said, often fill gaps in statutory services, and with the public sector reform agenda, the value and role of the third sector must be part of the conversation and the development and delivery of the partnership agreement that we have been talking about. So again, I want to thank everybody for their contribution in this debate, and I hope that we go on to work together to make sure that we can establish a really good working relationship with the third sector, which means in turn that our communities will do better. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Ms Mocking, can I ask you to just move the amendment? I'm sorry if you have already.
I moved the amendment.
Thank you. Now call Holly Bruce to move and speak to Amendment 356.5 to be followed by Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. I refer to my register of interest as a member of Glasgow City Council, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for working collaboratively with the Greens on this important motion. I want to begin by thanking the third sector workforce who are there for us day in and day out. They are the ones who step up when schools close, when the NHS is stretched to its limit, and long after the police leave. They ensure the vulnerable have a safe bed for the night, provide solace to people fleeing domestic abuse, listen to the voices of young people and stand side by side with children experiencing poverty. They don't just provide services, they guide people through the most traumatic experiences of their lives. I also want to thank them for their expertise ahead of this debate, most notably SCVO, the Core Foundation, Volunteer Scotland and the Poverty Alliance. Deputy Presiding Officer, there is one unifying experience of staff who work in the third sector in Scotland, regardless of whether they are a specialist in crisis support or advancing human rights, and that is the experience of funding. Entry-level jobs in the third sector are routinely part-time, temporary and often one-year contracts, as Cara Mohan had pointed out. And this is a direct consequence of how the Scottish Government and other bodies structure their funding. Funding is isolated, often single projects with tightly restricted budgets, while completely ignoring a charity's core costs. What about the mat cover, the HR costs and legal requirements for the charity simply to exist? Core funding for charities is essential, yet it remains painfully elusive. For people working in the third sector, these precarious contracts create a gruelling treadmill. For decades, this has driven away good, passionate staff to other sectors that offer them that stability. It doesn't have to be like this. Deputy Presiding Officer, the crushing precarity of short-term funding is left nowhere more acutely than in services tackling violence against women and girls. As the former chair of the VOG partnership in Glasgow, I wrote to the former Minister for Equality's Cockab Stewart. While we were successful in securing inflationary increases for that financial year for those sectors, the reality is that sticking plaster funding is no longer enough. We must fairly and sustainably fund the third sector for the life-saving work it delivers. And if I may, Presiding Officer, I want to take a moment to pay tribute to Cockab Stewart for her historic time in this Parliament as the first woman of colour ever elected to this chamber and as a tireless, authentic champion for equality. Earlier this week, I met with Sisters Against Cuts, a grassroots feminist campaign fighting the closure of the women's service at Murray's Initiative, as my colleague Iris Duane pointed out earlier. It's a vital, trauma-informed sanctuary for survivors of gender-based violence, domestic abuse and addiction. One service user shared her reality with me, and I want to thank her for trusting me to share this experience. She said, "Whenever we ask for support, we are told these cuts are due to tough choices. But why are women's services always the first to be attacked? Murray's keeps us alive. After fleeing domestic abuse, being homeless for 2 years with 2 disabled children and surviving rape, this service was my lifeline. We just want to live free from violence and recover with dignity." Deputy Presiding Officer, with tough choices mean abandoning women who have survived the unthinkable. The system is fundamentally broken. When will this government move past temporary fixes and provide multi-year inflation-proof funding that keeps these lifelines open? And I'm pleased to see that the Cabinet Secretary indicated that there will be some changes in multi-year funding in her speech earlier. The Cabinet Secretary will also be aware that SCVO's 2026 manifesto calls to bolster the third sector and ensure survival of essential, often life-saving charities. This, says SCVO, should be underpinned in statute. And I agree. And I respectfully disagree with the Cabinet Secretary's points on that. It's a time and resource-intensive experience putting through legislation through this Parliament. Both things can go in tandem. And I think there's a glaring lack of consistency across some government departments with their legislation and strategies. And it's pushing the sector to the brink. And Since 1999, Wales has legally embedded third sector collaboration into its government, and through a 25-member council that meets with the Welsh Government twice a year, the scheme provides charities with high-value recognition, strengthening accountability and cross-government cooperation. We can learn from our devolved nation counterparts. The First Minister's decision to create a Cabinet Secretary for Public Service Reform signals that cuts are coming. We know from decades of austerity that when statutory services are slashed, the third sector is left to plug the gaps. I'll respectfully not in this debate, but would happy to have a conversation offline, acting as the last line of defence for our most vulnerable. But if the government is truly looking for efficiencies, it should look at how it allocates its money. And as previously mentioned, I'm pleased to hear that multi-year funding is being looked at. The Cora Foundation, according to their research, have said simply moving to a default of multi-year funding structures would save an astonishing £900 million currently, wasted up by the third sector on the endless annual application cycle, also mentioned by Carol in her remarks. If we truly want to transform public services, we must start sustainably funding our third sector, and I welcome the beginning of that from the Cabinet Secretary today. The job of the third sector organisations is of course much bigger than being on the front line. The policy work undertaken by many charities in Scotland offers a truly unique insight into the lived experience of people. As I have mentioned, Deputy Presiding Officer, and outlined, the one unifying piece that we've heard and through my remarks today is that one of funding. And the crux of the Green Amendment is for a transition to multi-year funding as a default. We know that the primary barrier to multi-year funding is that the Scottish Government itself is restricted by single-year allocations from the Westminster Government, and financial instability is restricted by the UK Government's failure to reimburse our third sector of the £75 million annual cost of increased employer NICs. While long-term funding remains our absolute aspiration, Scots Labour must also work with us to demand both a fairer multi-year settlement and full mitigation of these NICs from their Westminster colleagues. Thank you.
I call Murdo Fraser to speak and move Amendment 356.4 to be followed by Morven May McCallum.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by welcoming this debate and pay tribute, as others have done across the Chamber, to all those working in the third sector, because it's a reality that without the third sector and its organisations, Scottish society and our economy would be much the poorer. And indeed, across many parts of the public sector, particularly in areas such as health, social care or education, were it not for the contribution of third sector organisations, the government would not be able to deliver many of its policy objectives. And there are many organisations I could name-check this afternoon. At the same time, I'll restrict myself to one because I visited them very recently, the Strathmore Centre for Youth Development in Blairgowrie, SCID as they're known, who do so much good work for youngsters who need support. And they celebrated their 25th birthday just last month, and I had the privilege of attending with them to see once again the excellent work that they do. And as has already been said in this debate, the third sector is full of individuals working hard with very limited resources. Very many depend on volunteers, volunteers who we should salute, individuals giving up their spare time to help others. And that is a contribution of incalculable benefit to the Scottish economy. And yet, the reality is we have a third sector in crisis, as anyone who engages with the sector will testify. According to Third Force News, 81% of charities and voluntary organisations are facing financial challenges, while the Scottish Third Sector Tracker finds charities facing a triple threat of rising demand, falling income and rising costs. And in the meantime, the SNP government has cut third sector funding in real terms, with the amount of cash falling by £177 million in real terms between 2021 and 2023, representing 5% of the total. So the Cabinet Secretary today talks about a new third sector partnership agreement, and we look forward to hearing more about the detail of that, as indeed will those in the sector. There is certainly a case for reset and a new approach in respect of a number of different issues. Now, firstly, I would address the question of funding And the overall quantum of funding is important, but it's only part of the story, because the number one issue we hear from organisations, and we've heard it already in this debate, is the issue of security of multi-year funding. And over the years, I've met too many bodies who complain they have a hand-to-mouth existence, relying on year-to-year financial settlements. And indeed, I can quote examples from organisations who are already well into the new financial year before they even know how much cash they'll be getting to fund them. And that makes life extremely difficult for managers, those organising financial projections, and also for staff who are working without any ongoing job security. And it means for those organisations they're having to issue redundancy notices on a regular basis, and that inevitably leads to experienced and valuable staff looking for jobs elsewhere to try and get that job security while they wait on decisions from the government or from local authorities or other public agencies. And I heard with great interest what the Cabinet Secretary had to say about multi-year funding today. We've been hearing that now for more than a decade, and it hasn't been delivered. The SNP had a previous commitment to deliver fairer funding by 2026, this year. But so far, all we've seen is a pilot scheme worth £130 million over 2 years. And that is the biggest single change that will make a real difference to the sector. And Holyrood made an important point in her contribution about the amount of money that actually would be saved to the sector if that multi-year funding was put in place, because they would not then have the administrative cost of issuing redundancy notices and potentially losing staff as a result. And the Cabinet Secretary, when she responded to my intervention, said, well, you know, the Scottish Government doesn't get multi-year funding from UK Government. Yes, undoubtedly, that is usually the case. But we know the Scottish Government's budget. We know overwhelmingly what the value of that will be. And while there are in-year revisions, inevitably these in-year revisions put the budget up. They don't put it down. So I think there's much more flexibility in terms of the solutions the government could find. And we also need to ensure, and this is a different point, that third sector groups who are in receipt of government funds do not then feel bound to support government policy. This is a point referenced in the Liberal Democrat amendment this afternoon. And I'm sure members here will recall when my former colleague Douglas Ross introduced the Right to Recovery Bill, a bill supported by many working in the drug and alcohol sector, but some leading organisations heavily dependent on Scottish Government funding came out and opposed it. And there was a suspicion...
Mr Fraser may wish to wind up and to move his amendment as well.
Thank you. Well, there was a suspicion that was because they didn't want to bite the hands that feeds. Many more points I'd make, Presiding Officer, but my time is up. I'm happy to move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. And I now call on Morven May McCallum to speak to and move Amendment 356.3.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to declare that I'm a councillor for the Highland Council, a volunteer for Lyme Disease UK and Lyme Disease Resource Centre as well. It's no secret the third sector is very close to my heart. As many of you here know, I have a long-term illness. And when the NHS couldn't provide the support I needed, it was the Lyme disease charities which picked up the pieces, who signposted me to the help I needed to get me to where I am today, in this very chamber. Sadly, Presiding Officer, many of those charities no longer exist. I tell this story because the third sector is not some abstract line in a budget. It's about people. It's the volunteers who pick up the phone when no one else will. It's the organisations that catch people who have slipped through the net. The third sector employs around 5% of Scotland's entire workforce. It is an essential part of how our country is run, and it's about time we treated it as such. On that point, on employment, it's a really important one, because the third sector does employ around 5% of Scotland's workforce, but it goes much deeper than that. The third sector is far more likely to employ those who find it difficult to get into work in the first place. The recent figures estimate that 27% of those employed in the third sector are disabled, compared to just 21% in the public sector, and even less in private companies. With a turnover of almost £10 billion, it contributes massively to the Scottish economy. I would like to explore one aspect of how the third sector impacts my local area. The Highlands and Islands region has the highest density of social enterprises in Scotland. Organisations like New Start Highland, which provides employability training and housing support to those in crisis. In the community-owned distillery in Dingwall, using green energy to bring back distilling to the area for the first time in over 100 years. In fact, there are over 1,200 social enterprises in the Highlands and Islands alone, supporting over 7,000 jobs and generating hundreds of millions of pounds to the economy and to the community. In a region like mine, suffering from depopulation and rural poverty, those figures are not to be overlooked. The reality is, the money we invest in the third sector comes back to us and to our community many times over. So we shouldn't be afraid of throwing the full weight of the Scottish Government behind those organisations. There is nothing in the Government's motion that we disagree with, which is why our amendment seeks to add to the motion by calling for proper long-term, multi-year funding that lasts more than 2 years, a grant system which provides smaller charities equal access to government cash. And importantly, charities need the right and the confidence to be able to publicly criticise the government without worrying about losing funding or facing repercussions. Without all this, we simply cannot provide the security and the certainty that those charities need, because a quarter of charity staff are on fixed-term contracts, and many have no idea if they will have a job in the next 12 months. Surely we can do better than that. Yes, the fairer funding scheme is a great step forward, but it falls short of what the sector is asking for. They need a funding model that provides true sustainability, proper flexibility and more autonomy in what they can do with their money. That is why I call for this amendment and I move it in my name. And I thank the Government and other parties for their support. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move on to the open debate, and our first speaker is Don Black, who will be followed by Stuart McMillan. Don Black has 5 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I refer you to my register of interests that I'm a serving councillor on Aberdeenshire Council and also chair of the charity Kincardine and Men's Youth Clubs. Presiding Officer, I welcome this debate on improving and in strengthening the Scottish Government's relationship with third sector partners, and would suggest that it's long overdue and perhaps that some of our local authorities could be encouraged to do the same. And I also welcome the supportive tone of the Cabinet Secretary's statement. Increasingly, public services are reliant on the third sector to deliver those services it cannot due to budget and capacity constraints. Whether they be national organisations or local initiatives, SCIOs or social enterprises, the third sector are delivering services that are vital to the well-being of our communities. Some will be managing to employ staff, but also many rely on the goodwill of volunteers. Some are solely run by volunteers. And no matter what their focus is, these organisations all have one thing in common: to make a tangible, positive difference to the lives of the communities they serve, so folk can live healthier and happier lives. Take the Montrose Community Trust at Links Park in my constituency of Angus North and Mearns that I had the pleasure of visiting during the recent election campaign. From football coaching for youngsters and walking football for those less able, to Montrose Connections, their dementia service, to Breakfast in a Box, a free breakfast club alongside household budget advice, to an international speaking club for those whom English is a second language, and their latest initiative, a Midlife Matters programme for women experiencing menopause. And significantly, they are also ambitious to do far more, with their Gable End project to provide the dedicated dementia centre Montrose and the surrounding area deserves. The impact that they have locally cannot be underestimated. They employ 16 people who, along with 112 volunteers, deliver 32 educational, health and sporting programmes which serve over 6,000 participants annually, and they have also invested almost £850,000 locally since 2012. And that is a record to be proud of and an organisation to be encouraged and championed, and it is just one of many. This is the type of organisation that we need to be supporting with multi-year funding so that they can plan ahead and have stability for the programmes they currently deliver and that they aspire to in their mission to help people live happier, healthier lives built on inclusion, connection and purpose. Yes, I'll give one.
Callum Kerr.
I thank Don Black for giving way. No microphone?
The member may wish to put his mic on. Is it not working? Maybe you haven't got your card in, or your card might not be in properly. Your card seems to be in. If there is a problem, perhaps you could move to another mic and maybe...
It's on now?
It is, yes.
Okay, right, we got there. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would refer people to my register of interests. Until March, I was Chair of Borders Citizens Advice Consortium and also of Peebles Citizens Advice, and I have 14 years' experience in citizens' advice. I think Don Black's making a very important point about multi-year, that it's not just on the Scottish Government, but it's for other funding bodies to do the same. As Chair of the Consortium, I negotiated a 5-year contract with Scottish Borders Council, 3+2. So will she join me in encouraging local government as well as central government in doing multi-year contracts?
Don Black.
Yes, absolutely. Do agree with that. Whether it be local authorities, whether it be National Lottery, no matter where the funding is coming from, we need to be looking towards that sustainability of our third sector so that they can plan ahead. So we need to ensure that the Scottish Government is providing funding to a point that is more easily accessed both for revenue and capital projects with less restrictive criteria and longer spending periods. Organisations Scotland-wide need appropriate spaces to be able to deliver their services, as increasingly public spaces are unavailable, unsuitable or restrictive and not fit for purpose. Rejuvenation and renovation building projects for housing third sector initiatives should also be supported, because it's known that a pound in the hands of the third sector can go so much further than if used by the local authority or the government. So let's make the most of that and trust these organisations to deliver, of course, with appropriate safeguards and monitoring in place. Currently, far too many obstacles are put in the way of the third sector, especially smaller charities that are run by volunteers, like my youth club organisation. There are overly onerous funding applications, as have already been mentioned this afternoon, processes and the community asset transfers also that are being stalled or rejected by local authorities, which totally goes against the spirit of the Community Empowerment Act. So let's sweep these obstacles away. Rightly or wrongly, in a quirk of human psychology, oftentimes something that is given is not as valued as something that has been worked for. It tends to be taken for granted. So when communities, organisations and volunteers come together to provide facilities and services, they are more highly valued and respected by those using them, taking ownership and a sense of purpose and pride. So let's help make that happen for our third sector organisations, working with them in partnership, because if they build it, people will come.
We move on to Stuart McMillan, who will be followed by Colette Stevenson. Stuart McMillan.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First of all, I'd like to refer members to my register of interests as the Chair of Moving On Inverclyde and also an Ambassador for the Ocean Youth Trust for Scotland. Long before my election to this Parliament, I had a firm belief that the state cannot fix everything. Sometimes the state is actually the bearer of the problems in the first instance. So it really is important and absolutely crucial that we actually have a very strong third sector in our communities. It can be more flexible, it can act quicker, and also deal with events, often making it more efficient. Now, it can also take a more person-centred approach in contrast to some public sector services where impact is measured by how many people can actually be seen. Now, Safe Harbour in my constituency is a prime example of this approach. Now, having both public and third sector organisations working together in our communities is essential. And I've spoken of my involvement with Moving On Inverclyde in this chamber before, and over the last decade the organisation has changed immeasurably. It's now engaging with many more people locally. It's a stronger reputation locally. We'll be expanding into new premises in Port Glasgow, and as a partnership agreement with Your Voice, and also another third sector organisation, to deliver a particular project for the Edinburgh Alcohol and Drugs Recovery Service. The flexibility and the improved outcomes for people who need these services is really what is important, irrespective as to who delivers for them. Presiding Officer, the COVID-19 pandemic brought trauma and pain for many people, and it was also resulted in some remarkable activity within all of our communities. Now, the public sector pivoted practically overnight in many cases, and the number of people volunteering was remarkable, and the third sector pulled together like nothing I've ever seen before. And fundamentally, the partnership between both public and third sector was imperative. Neither could have supported my community alone. And these are just a couple of local examples of why the third sector are absolutely crucial to the nation. On a national scale, and I welcome the SNP Scottish Government's delivering the multi-year funding and committing to develop an agreement with the third sector to strengthen its voice and also improve lives. This third sector partnership, as the Cabinet Secretary touched upon, will set out how the Scottish Government and the third sector can work together to enhance services. And this includes protecting the sector's future and independence with fairer funding, the focus on shared goals to improve outcomes for people and communities, and also providing greater opportunity to contribute to policy and also service design. Sure.
Stephen Kerr.
I don't want to let that passage of his speech pass without offering a correction to Stuart McMillan. I'm not sure the Cabinet Secretary did make a full-on commitment to multi-year funding. I think she's very gingerly approaching the subject. Perhaps some people might say too slowly, but I don't think there's a wholesale commitment to multi-year funding. At least I didn't hear that, unless the Cabinet Secretary is going to contradict me.
Stuart McMillan.
No, I think certainly Mr Kerr is obviously very accustomed to challenging, and quite rightly so. And I certainly, with what I heard from the Cabinet Secretary earlier, and also part of the discussion earlier on too, Sure.
Cabinet Secretary.
This is a rather strange way of trying to address Stephen Kerr's point, so I'm grateful to the member for giving me the opportunity to say that we have already progressed fairer funding. That's why 60% of grants in my portfolio are now in fairer funding, and I have a commitment to continue the progress towards fairer funding right across government, and I hope that helps the member and indeed Mr Kerr.
Stuart McMillan.
So Mr Kerr is sadly shaking his head in disagreement. But that's not for the first time. Yeah, it's not for the first time, as we all know, in this chamber. So, Presiding Officer, I think this pilot is the first step in actually mainstreaming multi-year funding agreements more widely and across the third sector, giving organisations the ability to plan and make the most of their resources. Now, I touched upon moving on Inverclyde, which I'm going to come on to in a moment. Now, the Greens amendment referencing the annual £75 million cost charities need to pay for the employer national insurance contribution is affecting organisations across the country. Now, that's £75 million being spent on something that actually could be utilised in the front line. Now, the decisions taken to manage the extra burden will have a wider knock-on effects for communities. And we all know that British Heart Foundation have announced that it's going to close around 150 shops across the UK, and Cancer Research UK are also planning to close around 190 of its high street shops by April 2027. Now, this policy introduced by Labour at Westminster is highly destructive, and it's destroying jobs and also making the trading environment impossible for many good local organisations. Now, the Conservative amendment is somewhat confusing, in addition to adding a bureaucratic nightmare to manage. Third sector organisations obtain funding from a wide variety of sources on an annual basis. They don't only get money from government. So as such, with the Conservative amendments that we are discussing today, in 1 year, an organisation might fall into whatever criteria the Conservatives are arguing for, but then the next year they might fall out of that criteria because of where the funding comes from. So that would then potentially mean organisations really fluctuating on an annual basis as to whether they should be reporting or not reporting. So I do think that the Conservative amendment is actually quite ridiculous, and it would add costs and become even more bureaucratic for organisations. And I do find it a bit strange that the Conservatives actually are arguing for more red tape in contrast to actually trying to reduce some of the red tape to allow organisations to deliver in our communities. So I'm conscious, I'm sorry, Mr Kim, I'm just about to finish, because I've already, unless the presiding officer can let me take the... No, I'm just about to finish. So presiding officer, fundamentally, without the third sector, our communities would look very different, and our constituents are very much the richer for all of their existence within the communities. Thank you very much.
Colette Stevenson, to be followed by Colin Merrick. Colette Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And before turning to the substance of today's debate, I would like to take a moment to say how proud I am to once again represent the wonderful people of East Kilbride in this Parliament. It is perhaps fitting that one of my first contributions of this new session is on the subject of Scotland's partnership with the third sector, because East Kilbride is home to countless organisations, volunteers and community groups whose dedication strengthens our town every single day. Scotland's third sector is essential to the well-being of our communities. There are great charities working at the national level to deliver services and tackle poverty and inequality, aligning with Scottish Government priorities. Solutions are more effective when they are designed with communities rather than for communities. And I want to mention just a couple of the many fantastic local organisations we have in East Kilbride. Loaves and Fishes was set up over 30 years ago. Initially offering a street meal service, the charity, led by Leslie Davidson, has evolved and now provides over 250 food parcels a week, including fresh and frozen produce. And it runs a community cafe in Greenhills with computer facilities. People can also use clothes and dishes at Loaves and Fishes, and no money required store when people can get clothes and household goods to support them. The Citizens Advice Bureau is another organisation working hard to support people. Last year, East Kilbride CAB assisted more than 2,500 people, helping them gain around £800,000. Healthy and Active is dedicated to enhancing the lives of people in East Kilbride. They run the Shop Mobility Scheme in the town centre. The meeting place provides a nice space for people to socialise and enjoy some food and drink. And with an electric minibus, supported by Scottish Government funding, Healthy and Active also offers community transport. So just like Loaves and Fishes, Healthy and Active works holistically with classes and drop-in sessions to support people in East Kilbride. Third sector organisations work on the ground every day, and they possess a wealth of expertise. They identify barriers before they become apparent elsewhere. However, sometimes there is a lack of innovation due to short-term funding. So in the last session, the Social Justice and Social Security Committee engaged widely with the third sector, including on the funding arrangements they require to best carry out their vital roles. In fact, I remember one person mentioning, particularly during the COVID and lockdown period, that we should watch our language in terms of calling it the third sector, and it should be called the essential sector.
Would the member take an intervention on that?
Yes, thank you.
Michelle Campbell.
I thank the member for giving way. Just to point to my own register of interest as a member of the NHS as a nurse, in terms of that essential criteria that you've just mentioned there, the role of third sector is actually a dovetail and actually saves money in the long term, so that investment makes it crucial. Do you agree with this point?
Colette Stevenson.
I thank the member for that intervention, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I think it's down to prevention. And yeah, I agree there with you. Thank you. So one big ask was from the committee's engagement there was multi-year funding. And I'm delighted with the SNP government's commitments on this. So as we've mentioned already, a fairer funding pilot is already underway. This has given multi-year funding certainty to a number of charities and is the first step in mainstreaming multi-year funding agreements more widely across the third sector. However, as in many cases, the positive steps being taken in Scotland are being stymied by Westminster. Labour's national insurance rises, as been mentioned a few times, are estimated to cost charities here £75 million per year. Labour MSPs should, like SNP MSPs, demand that the UK Labour Government fully compensate the third sector on this highly destructive policy. In addition to financial security, the Scottish Government will develop an agreement with the third sector, and that third sector partnership is backed by SCVO and will strengthen the third sector's voice, secure its future and ultimately improve lives. Presiding Officer, I see the benefits that third sector organisations bring to Scotland and to my hometown of East Kilbride, having worked in several charities before being elected. So to conclude, I commend the essential role that the third sector plays in supporting people and communities. The UK Labour Government must compensate the sector for its damaging national insurance hikes. I want these organisations to get the financial security of mainstream multi-year funding so that they can continue to evolve, to support people and to tackle inequalities. I fully support the Scottish Government's plans to strengthen our third sector. Thank you.
Colin Merrick, to be followed by Alex Kerr. Colin Merrick, 5 minutes.
I'd like to refer to my register of interests and declare I'm a councillor in East Renfrewshire Council. Presiding Officer, the third sector is the glue that holds communities together, and that's certainly true in my constituency of Glasgow Anniesland, and across that constituency local organisations provide support where and when it is needed most, whether that be tackling food insecurity, helping young people access opportunities, promoting community well-being, to providing advice and advocacy services. These organisations are deeply rooted in our communities. They understand the local needs because they are part of those communities, and they are often the first to respond when challenges come along and also the last to walk away. And that's why I welcome the Scottish Government's commitment to developing a new third sector partnership agreement co-designed with the sector itself. The true measure of success for any partnership depends on genuine collaboration, and it's right that the organisations who deliver so much for our communities have a central role in shaping the framework that will govern that relationship. I'm particularly encouraged by the commitment to draw upon the key principles outlined in the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations 2026 manifesto. The principles set out by SCVO reflect many of the issues that organisations have consistently raised with me, recognising the need to protect the future and independence of the sector through fairer funding arrangements, focusing on shared goals and outcomes for people and communities rather than the burdensome process and short-term targets, and recognising that third sector organisations must have meaningful opportunities to contribute to policy development and service design from the outset, rather than being consulted only after decisions have already been made. Presiding Officer, today's debate, unlike some we have had this session, has been a breath of fresh air and hopefully shows us what we can achieve if we work together. The amendment in the name of Morven May McCallum rightly highlights something that is sometimes overlooked when we discuss the third sector. Namely, the sector is not only a provider of services, it is also a major employer. More than 130,000 people work within Scotland's third sector, and many organisations provide opportunities for people who may face barriers to employment, including disabled people, carers and those returning to work after periods of illness, or people with caring responsibilities. Often leading the way in adopting flexible working practices, and as the amendment notes, women make up around 64% of the third sector workforce. That reflects both the opportunities that the sector provides and the important role it plays in creating workplaces that are accessible and inclusive. There is also a clear thread running through a number of the amendments before us today. Whether it's the amendments lodged by Morven May McCallum, Holly Bruce, Carl Mockin or Julie McDougall, there is a growing and clear consensus across this chamber and across the sector itself for the need for multi-year, simplified and flexible funding arrangements. For far too long, many organisations have been forced to operate within a cycle of short-term funding settlements that create uncertainty for staff, volunteers and service users alike. Organisations spend valuable time applying for funding, reapplying for funding and planning for funding cliff edges, when that time could be far better spent delivering services and supporting communities. The move towards fairer funding has been welcomed by the sector, but there is clearly more work to do. Multi-year funding, where possible, gives organisations the certainty needed to retain skilled staff, plan strategically and focus on outcomes. Simplified funding processes can reduce administrative burdens, particularly for smaller community organisations that often lack the resources to navigate complex application systems. And I hope that as we move forward, the third sector partnership agreement will provide a meaningful opportunity to build on this welcome consensus. In terms of moving forward, I would also welcome some further details regarding who will be involved in the co-design process. How will the Government ensure that the voices of smaller grassroots organisations are heard alongside the larger national bodies? And how will organisations representing marginalised communities be included? Most importantly, for constituencies such as Glasgow and Island, how will local organisations be able to feed directly into the design and development of the agreement? Presiding Officer, Scotland's third sector has demonstrated extraordinary resilience in the face of unprecedented challenges. It deserves a relationship with government that reflects its importance, respects its independence and supports its sustainability. Thank you.
Alex Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for bringing forward this crucial debate. The communities across Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse are incredibly well served by the work of the third sector. I know, because I've seen it firsthand as part of my work for the late Christina McKelvey MSP as our Community Engagement Officer and during the recent election campaign this year. I've had the privilege to see some of these organisations grow from the very beginnings of my career, such as the fantastic Supporting Our Communities in Hill House, commonly known as SOC, which was founded by volunteers from Hill House, Burnbank and Blantyre, including Mark and Donna Rouse, who have been a driving force in providing support for the community after the tragic death of their 16-year-old daughter Darian. This tragedy drove Mark and Donna to expand the original aim of SOC far beyond expanding access to mental health care to the award-winning organisation it is today, now offering a huge number of programmes, classes, courses and training events. Through their actions and the services they provide, they have touched the lives of countless people in their community, people who might otherwise have fallen through the cracks. And we all know there are people like Mark and Donna across Scotland doing this work day in and day out in communities across our country. In most cases, a service provided directly by the public sector would be entirely unsustainable in the long run, a fact that I firmly believe is not appreciated nearly enough across all spheres of our political life, and one which is always at the forefront of my mind when considering how public money is best spent. This stark and inescapable reality is not one which we in this place should fear. As long as we have the courage and humility to work in partnership with the wider society we strive to serve, we can deliver affordable public services that truly meet the needs of the citizens of our nation. And at the end of the day, who knows better what the needs of our citizens and communities are, better than those living in the communities themselves? Our job should be to empower our communities to deliver what they know is needed locally and use what they've established as a base to build on, while including them in the design and delivery of the services they use. This empowerment of individuals and communities is one of the key principles arising from the Christie Commission on the future delivery of public services, a key document informing this Parliament's work on public service reform. The other principles are worth reminding ourselves of as well to guide us in our decision-making. Integrating service provision by working much more closely in partnership to improve outcomes, prioritising spending on services which prevent negative outcomes from occurring in the first place, tackling problems at source, and, crucially, increasing efficiency in the delivery of our public services by reducing duplication and sharing services wherever possible. I firmly believe if we keep these principles at the forefront of our mind throughout this Parliament, we will be able to deliver public services that our communities can be proud of. And on that final principle of increasing efficiency by reducing duplication and sharing services, I would encourage members across this chamber to engage with the organisations delivering in their own local areas and ask them for their views. I've had some fantastic conversations. Last month I spoke to Nancy and Terry of the Larkhall Town Plan, who are involved in a host of local initiatives in the town, from growing to planning and a whole host of other services. And in the process they've highlighted a particularly obvious example of duplication, which is getting in the way of empowering our local communities and is a great opportunity to help share services locally. So I'll be writing to the Cabinet Secretary to raise this particular example with her and help move forward some public service reform at a local level too. I've also had the pleasure to re-engage with the Larkhall District Volunteer Group, which is run by Sandra McCrory, who do fantastic work, particularly with older residents, and to tackle social isolation and loneliness, another issue that is very often not given the significance it deserves. Their free call line offers friendly, regular phone calls for lonely or vulnerable people living in the Lanarkshire area, with volunteers making daily calls from Monday to Friday, either in the morning or afternoon, for a friendly chat and to check that members are safe and well. The service provides reassurance and social contact for those who live alone and feel isolated. Another service that I think would be incredibly difficult for the public sector to deliver on its own. So I'd like to end by putting one of our fantastic community organisations, the third sector, back at the centre of the debate, and would like to extend an invite to the newly appointed Minister, Samita Kumar, to come along and see the work of Larkhall District Volunteer Group firsthand. Thanks again to the Cabinet Secretary for bringing this debate.
We now move to closing speeches. Yi Pei Chow Turvey.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy President Officer. So, as I close this debate for the Scottish Liberal Democrats, I declare interest of being an Aberdeenshire councillor and also on the board of trustees of the Barn Art and La Petite French School of Aberdeen. And yes, all of the third sectors group, me and my team have been part of, or contributed to and helped in the journey. In the northeast of Scotland, we are buzzing with those people, helping and willing and caring, working for free or paid pennies to support people in their daily life. And indeed, over the past 20 years, many of the vital public sector jobs we spoke about just last week have migrated to the third sector. Community-led, community-delivered, specialised service, co-developed with the service users themselves. Amazing, we may think, yes, but at the same time, those organisations face insecure funding. They rely on the goodwill and expertise of volunteer trustees and also have to support thousands of people to negotiate to complex public services, especially in our justice system, for example. Name a few: Victims Scotland, Women Aid, Citizen Advice, the WISE Group, and many more are helping people in their daily life. And those are real pressure faced by the third sector organisation every day. And they are doing a fantastic job. But in my experience as a beneficiary, a trustee and a councillor, and here in my role in this chamber, it tells me that they deserve more support than they were giving them. Like my colleague across the chamber this afternoon stated, the third sector is crying out for multi-year funding. Time and money is put to waste by creating systems that rely on annual funding cycles and the financial insecurity it creates. As have highlighted my dear neighbours, Councillor Dawn Black MSP, the third sector organisation need to be involved as equal partners in design and decision-making. As a Liberal Democrat, I'm driven by our commitment to look at this decentralising and decision-making right down to the hearts of communities. A commitment to co-design cannot be for show only. We need to listen to the third sector, even if what it's telling us feels uncomfortable. That's why I call on those of us here in the chamber to support the amendment brought forward by my colleague Morven McCallum, who is calling for the third sector to be given a licence to criticise. That those best placed to feedback, to guide, to contribute, strengthening of partnership between the Scottish Government and the third sector should never fear, and in fact should be encouraged to speak out in ways that will challenge the status quo. I also commend my colleagues for outlining the vital role the third sector plays as an employer. Public and private employers both could learn from the third sector in creating flexible and inclusive roles for carers and people with disabilities. Presiding officers, too often public bodies of all sizes overlook the voluntary sector or don't treat them equally when planning or delivering services or making decisions or delivery. If we are truly to strengthen our partnership, then the third sector needs to be embraced as an equal partner across the board. A formal commitment that is built into structure across all levels of government and public bodies would ensure that warm words that we often said are actually put into action. Thank you.
Stephen Kerr, up to 5 minutes.
Let me begin by recognising the outstanding contribution made by genuine charities and voluntary organisations right across Scotland. I see it every week and I see it everywhere in mid-Scotland and Fife. They support vulnerable families, they help people through crisis, tackle loneliness and strengthen our communities. And Scotland would undoubtedly be the poorer without them. But that is not what concerns me today. What concerns me is the increasingly opaque relationship between the Scottish Government and parts of the third sector. For years, my office has tried to follow the money. We've submitted parliamentary questions, pursued FOIs and trawled through annual reports. And I can tell members that it should not be this difficult to establish where taxpayers' money is going. And yet there is no single source of information. There's no straightforward way for parliamentarians, journalists or taxpayers to understand who is receiving public funds, how much they're receiving and what they are spending it on. Public money should not require a treasure hunt, but my concern goes beyond transparency. I have repeatedly raised concerns about organisations whose principal activity appears increasingly to be political activism rather than charitable work. Organisations that campaign, that lobby, that try to help shape public policy, and organisations that increasingly seek to influence what children are taught in our schools. Earlier this year, Daniel Sanderson, the Scottish political editor of The Times and Sunday Times, performed what I believe was a significant public service. His investigations exposed the extent to which public money is being used to sustain organisations that are then presented as independent voices supporting government policy. And then came perhaps the most revealing contribution of all, Alex Neil, a former SNP Cabinet Secretary, a man who sat around the Cabinet table. Alex Neil spoke about ministers approaching what he described as friendly organisations to support controversial policies. Now, let's think about that. A former SNP Cabinet Secretary effectively describing a system in which the government funds organisations, those organisations who support the government, their policy, that support is then presented as evidence of independent backing. Now that's not a claim from the opposition, although I agree with it. That's a warning from somebody who was there. If members think this is merely theoretical, I can give many examples, but let me only give a couple. LGBT Youth Scotland. Over many years, it's received substantial sums of public money, while becoming increasingly embedded within Scotland's education system through educational resources, training programmes and discussions around gender identity and sexuality, including in primary schools. The Scottish Drugs Forum. They receive substantial grants from Scottish Government funds that are integrated into the policy-making process, lobbying for drug consumption rooms and against the Right to Recovery Bill. Let us call it for what it is. Yes, of course.
Cabinet Secretary.
I would say I'm gratefully for the member for taking intervention, but I'm concerned by his argument. There are organisations who do support government purpose on tackling child poverty, on climate action, as it should be. There are other organisations who I know support Conservative policies, Labour policies, Liberal Democrat policies. That is part of the democratic system, that organisations choose which policies they have and which party best represents them, or which changes we should make. Surely that is a good thing, that organisations speak out, and I can assure you they speak out both for and against the government on regular occasions.
Exactly. Stephen Kerr.
Quoting from the work that Dan Sanderson published in the Sunday Times in March, and I am illustrating his investigative journalism through specific examples that were quoted in the article, including the words of Alex Neil. There's a deliberately cynical exercise undertaken by government to create lobby, to create organisations which will lobby in support of government policy. Of course I will.
Very grateful to Mr Kerr for giving way. Just to be clear, and for the purposes of the Chamber to be clear, Mr Kerr will be aware that the Office of the Scottish Charities Regulator has a statutory role, and many of the organisations that he has just referenced, to my knowledge, have not expressed concern on the part of the OSCR. So is he therefore directly attacking the work of the OSCR, which is independent of us?
Stephen Kerr.
David Linden for his intervention, because he highlights the wording of our amendment. Because, frankly, yes, I am expressing concern about the genuineness of organisations that call themselves charities and that are based in Scotland and are registered with OSCR, that I believe the regulator should take a closer look at. Because these, I'll have to press on. I do apologise. I'm happy to talk to David Linden at any time about these issues. I'm talking about
the member must not
registered.
make an intervention unless the member with the floor has indicated agreement.
I'm grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer, but I am grateful to David Linden because he is highlighting the issue. I'm more than happy to discuss that outside of the very limited time I have for this speech, because there's other things that I wish to make, points I wish to make, because these are not politically neutral organisations I'm describing. They have clear ideological positions, they campaign for that position, they lobby for a position, they seek to influence public opinion and public policy in pursuit of that position, and they have every right to do so. What I question is why taxpayers are funding them, and some of these organisations are funded by public funds to the tune of 80+% of their entire funding. Now that should cause us concern, because when a government funds organisations to lobby the government and then points to them as neutral experts in support of their policy and to shut down dissent, surely this cannot be described as anything other than a corruption of our democratic process. I'm going to have to press on because I'm being encouraged to do so, and I'd love to have a longer time to speak. Maybe you can organise it between yourselves that we have more time to speak. The public are not fools. They're entitled to know who is funding whom. They're entitled to know who is influencing whom. They're entitled to know whether supposedly independent voices are in fact substantially dependent upon government support and funding. And too often the taxpayer is paying for both sides of the argument. They fund the government and they fund the organisations, telling us how wonderful the SNP government is. And the SNP have spent years building an echo chamber, then presenting the echo as independent evidence. That's not healthy, it's not transparent, and it undermines public trust. The solution, I have a solution. The solution, yes, I come bearing solutions. The solution is straightforward. Let's start with this. Whenever an organisation appears before a parliamentary committee, it should be required to declare how much funding it has received from the Scottish Government over the previous 5 years and what proportion of its total income that funding represents. Now, that's not asking too much. Declaration
the member
of interest
must start winding
is part of the normal processes of parliamentary committees and indeed this chamber. Parliament should know, the public should know, and taxpayers should know. That's not an attack on charities, Deputy Presiding Officer. It's a defence. A defence of transparency. It's a defence of accountability.
The
and
member
it's long
only
overdue.
had 5 minutes and has spoken for 8.5 minutes. I appreciate he took interventions, but he must stick to time. Thank you. I move on to Kate Nevins.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I was going to start my speech by saying that there felt like there was an overwhelming cross-party respect and support for Scotland's third sector, but I'm feeling like that might not be true from all parts of our chamber right now. But there does feel like there's strong recognition from most of us that our third sector is not only integral to community health and well-being and harm prevention, but it's also a valued source of expertise and knowledge for most of us, and a vital vehicle for community power. As part of this debate, it's been really great to hear about really meaningful local-level initiatives, like those mentioned by Dawn Black in Aberdeen, walking football, breakfast boxes, and about the compassionate staff behind the work of health charities like Lyme Disease UK, mentioned by Morven May McCallan. Yet it is also clear from today's discussion how precarious it is for the sector right now, with third sector organisations facing delays to funding decisions, long-term impacts of underfunding, cuts and threats of cuts, and far too many facing the possibility of job losses and closures. We've heard already today about the funding crisis Murray's initiative in Glasgow is facing, but they are not alone in this precarity. 64% of the Health and Social Care Alliance Scotland members reported financial insecurity at the end of last year, up from 49% in March 2024. In Dumfries and Galloway, Citizens Advice Bureau had its core funding cut by 20% in the last council budget. This is despite putting £9.8 million back into clients' pockets and into the local economy, as Stuart McMillan was mentioning earlier. The Scottish Huntington's Association, who provide a nationwide specialist service for families impacted by Huntington's disease, told me that statutory funding for this service, where provided, is typically on a 12-month basis via a complex jigsaw of local funders with different reporting requirements who often can't confirm funding until the eve of the new financial year. And this causes anxiety and uncertainty for frontline staff and, more importantly, for the extremely vulnerable people living with this condition. I welcome the Government's commitment today to fairer funding, a third sector agreement and to responding to the needs of the sector. As we know, and we have known for a really long time, we urgently need to move away from the traditional forms of funding and towards easily accessible, multi-year, flexible funding as default. These fairer, longer-term models of funding should enable organisations to cover their core costs, which are rising, to retain their autonomy and their values, to set their own priorities and work on their own terms, and be flexible and responsive to the changing needs of their communities that they know the best. We should also be looking to help get organisations off the hamster wheel of needlessly competitive and onerous funding applications and move away from the constraints of project-by-project cycles. We also need to recognise that this debate today is not just about central government funding schemes for the third sector, but also about properly funding our local government. Edinburgh Green Councillor Alice Mumford has helped secure some continuation of funding for local organisations who had their funding cut without warning and establish a new funding stream for those specifically impacted by IJB cuts in Edinburgh. But our councillors and our local organisations should not be put in this kind of position in the first place. We also need to move towards a stable, multi-year funding within the local government settlement and rebuild the trust that we are losing locally. And while I welcome the support across parties in the Chamber today for the importance of this kind of multi-year funding, it is extremely telling that we have a Labour Party who are willing to champion it for the third sector while denying the same long-term financial sustainability for this very Parliament. We will support the Labour amendment today, but in exchange they must commit to working with us and their Westminster colleagues to find a solution which allows our Parliament to meaningfully budget in a multi-year way. An area that perhaps hasn't been covered in as much detail this afternoon, although Carol Mochan mentioned the importance of frontline smaller organisations, is the really important role of small grassroots organisations in us having a thriving third sector here in Scotland, and how we make sure that our funding models are able to support organisations who perhaps don't have the governance structures, banking setup or history of grant management required for certain pots of funding. These smaller grassroots organisations are also often those facing some of the most acute safety and security issues, facing rising racism and transphobia in an increasingly hostile environment. And many of our community-led organisations are also staffed by volunteers and workers who themselves are experiencing multiple overlapping oppressions, trauma and burnout while supporting others. What can we do to better support these organisations with things like emergency hardship funds and quick access to cash to allow groups to cover essential costs like food, transport, security equipment and childcare? Where we support social spaces where groups can organise, create and recuperate, eat together and plan together, spaces run by and for grassroots groups. and where we properly invest in the broader infrastructure that can support smaller groups to thrive. Finally, I'm really pleased to see a commitment from the Scottish Government in their motion today to the principle of co-design, and would like to see a commitment to open government principles and a human rights approach to participation as part of that. Fundamentally, today's debate is not just a question of partnership, but of power, about a willingness on the part of government to treat the third sector as an equal partner, to meaningfully involve a diverse range of third sector and community voices in decision-making and properly resource these conversations, to fund courageously, trust generously and have honest and transparent conversations about funding, to share and redistribute power through processes that we use, and to recognise every decision has the potential to shape what grows, what survives and what and who remains marginal. Thank you.
Joe Long, up to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And the Register of Interest will show that until the 8th of May, I was employed as Director of Scottish Autism, which is the third sector organisation. And it's precisely because of that background that I've been heartened to see the Cabinet Secretary bring forward this motion and see consideration of the needs of the sector so early in this parliamentary session. Last week in the debate on public sector reform, I argued that, public service reform, I argued that public service reform and the New Deal with the third sector need to be considered in the round, and that's a sentiment I certainly repeat, having heard the contributions today, and it was certainly evident in that debate last week as well. There certainly does seem to be... Yes, certainly.
Cabinet Secretary.
Grateful to the member for giving me, particularly because he's just got started, but I think the aspect around public service reform is a very important one because it's about delivering better public services. For example, preventing homelessness is better for the government, it's better for the individual involved. It's not about cuts, it's about better public services for everyone, including the people that we're here to serve.
Joe Long.
Absolutely, fully recognise that and agree with that. There certainly seems to be cross-party consensus about the need for multi-year funding. We've heard that repeated across the chamber today. And I do know from my own experience that where we see year-on-year funding agreements, we often do see significant financial risk for organisations, some of them very small, as has been said, having to draw on limited reserves. So, that cliff edge that Colm Merrick mentioned, the situations that Kate Nevens just described are very real. And I do know of instances of where charities have waited several months into the financial year to find out whether they were funded from that April. As I think Murdo Fraser mentioned, that's a very real circumstance. So I'm pleased to see this addressed and discussed in the open today. And I just wanted, in that context, to say a word for third sector boards. We haven't talked a lot about boards today, but boards of trustees are themselves volunteers in the third sector, often taking on significant responsibilities for governance and finance. And this precarious funding situation means they're often weighing up the kind of fiduciary responsibilities with loyalty and concerns for their staff who they want to keep employed, don't want to see go while they're waiting for funding decisions. So they have that concern for their workforce, who, as we've heard from several people today, including in Holly Bruce's comments, are often in quite precarious positions. So I think, when we talk about engaging the sector, volunteer boards have to be thought about in particular. And to mention that precarity in employment, I think, what we do see is a sort of, at the moment, compounded inequalities between the public and the third sector in pay and conditions. If we take social care, for example, a report from the Coalition of Care and Support Providers of Scotland last October showed that the difference between the sort of basic salary band of a Band 3 NHS worker and a social care worker in a third sector organisation could be as much as 14% for a similar kind of skill level and responsibility level. So that's not about the politics of envy. The NHS absolutely deserve the pay and recognition, the rewards they get and more. But there is a fundamental inequality at the moment, without even taking into account things like unsocial hours or defined benefits pensions, that means that third sector social care providers are not just facing competition now from retail or hospitality for employers on similar levels of salaries, but they do risk losing staff to local government services or to the NHS, where their own local contracts with local government or government mean that paying similar terms and conditions is just not possible. So I think that sort of inequality needs to be looked at and understood. Yeah, certainly.
Callum Kerr.
I thank Joe Long for giving way. I think he's made a number of important points. As someone who's been on many boards, we know the challenge of finding a treasurer in particular. But on funding, there's something that hasn't come up as much today. Yes, year-on-year funding, but also core funding. So much of funding allocation is project-based. And organisations like Citizens Advice, who support 200,000 people a year, often struggle for that core funding. I wonder if he has any reflections on that as we come up with a fair funding model.
Joe Long.
I thank the member for that intervention, and it was my next point, actually. I was coming to exactly that. So, and it's very well made by the member, and indeed in Holly Bruce's contribution earlier on today as well. The costs borne by the third sector are not just in the pay of frontline staff, but sometimes when you see sort of the uplifts in contracts that come around April time from local authorities, you'd be forgiven for thinking that was the only uplift. So we need to ensure that an ethical commissioning process sees full contract value taken into account when contracts are uplifted in April funding rounds, since organisations also have to employ managers, back office staff, all those other people that keep the wheels moving to support their work. So I thank the member for that intervention. I will say there's been some discussion about the campaigning and advocacy role of third sector organisations today. I welcome the Liberal Democrat amendment and indeed the Cabinet Secretary's comments about the right of third sector organisations to campaign and speak up. I think it's very important because if charity sector organisations and service providers do find themselves increasingly campaigning and lobbying, it may just be because they feel that government has historically failed to listen to their expertise or the lived experience of those they support through the channels of engagement. We shouldn't expect funded organisations to live in a state of eternal gratitude that means they can't speak up for the people that are being failed. And I think it's really important that so often in the third sector, that duty to care for groups who are marginalised or disadvantaged and that duty to speak up for those groups, they're of a piece. They come together. That's what makes the third sector what it is. That's what makes it such a rich contribution to our society. So I welcome that recognition and I welcome that amendment made by the Liberal Democrats that makes that very clear. There will, I imagine, be some relief and good cheer among my former colleagues in the third sector at the consensus and the tone of today's debate. That might just be tempered by a bit of scepticism among professionals who've heard warm words and sympathetic noises before. The proof of the pudding will be in the eating. Yes, certainly.
Duncan Dunlop.
Slightly delayed. Thank you very much for giving way. The issue there within the Liberal Democrat amendment in regards being able to have licence to criticise as well as to shape policy. I worked most of my life in the third sector and in the Scottish third sector, and some of it was alluded to from across the chamber. It is really difficult when you're under funding pressures to really say, can I say that to the government? Will that have an impact on the funding stream that's coming down the line? It is a really difficult challenge. I don't know what the answer is at this moment, but it is really worth recognising it.
Joe Long.
I thank the member for that intervention and indeed for the amendment and the comments that have recognised that today. As I say, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. We have a pilot of fair funding going on at the moment. The third sector are very used to pilots, and often those pilots don't end up with initiatives that are scaled up or rolled out into real systemic change. So we need to ensure that whatever lessons are learned from the present pilot, those lessons and that structural change are implemented at speed. We need political decisiveness to raise the status of the third sector, put organisations on a sustainable footing and recognise and reward a specialist and highly skilled workforce. Without these changes, there are organisations even now that won't survive the length of this parliamentary session. I'm just wrapping up, so I won't take any more. I hope we can see the proposed measures implemented without delay, for there is certainly the political will across the chamber, as we've heard today, and we in these seats will certainly put our weight and our votes behind meaningful change if it's brought forward, and we will be supporting the Scottish Government's motion to that end today.
Amanda Lindsay, up to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As others have mentioned, the third sector is not a nice-to-have in Scotland. It's often the backbone of care, compassion and community support. With over 46,000 organisations employing more than 133,000 people and holding assets worth tens of billions, it proves that civic society, not central government, is often best placed to meet local needs. and it must be treated with the economic respect it deserves, not as an afterthought by Holyrood. These organisations step in every day where the state falls short, supporting cancer patients, veterans, those with neurological conditions and many others. Macmillan Cancer Care provides specialist nurses and holistic support. The Erskine Veterans Charity delivers vital care to those who served our country. The Scottish Huntington's Association offers expert help to those living with this devastating neurological condition. And Alzheimer's Scotland provides essential daycare and respite services. Alzheimer's Scotland was a lifeline to my own family when my father had dementia, and the practical support and respite they offered helped us cope and allowed my father to live with dignity. These organisations do far more than deliver services. They fill critical gaps in statutory provision. Councils and integrated joint boards turn to the third sector because it's often more cost-effective, agile and responsive than large public bureaucracies. They stretch public funds further through charitable fundraising, volunteers and specialist expertise. These charities bring community trust and a person-centred approach that statutory services frequently struggle to match. They prevent crises, reduce hospital admissions and often deliver better outcomes for less money. Yet, despite warm words about partnership, the reality on the ground is too often one of chronic underfunding and instability, as we've heard. The sector is in crisis. 64% of third sector organisations are financially insecure, and this is up sharply from 49% the previous year. Over 60% have faced direct cuts to core grants, while many are being forced to run down their reserves just to survive day-to-day operations. This is a manufactured crisis. The current public funding model is actively pushing Scotland's frontline defences to the absolute brink. Running down emergency reserves to fund day-to-day services is completely unsustainable and represents financial negligence by public funders. Macmillan Cancer Support itself has been forced to make significant redundancies and cut services in recent years, and this is due to funding pressures, leaving cancer patients with reduced access to the specialist support they desperately need. And, as Kate Nivens pointed out, even more stark is the situation facing the Scottish Huntington's Association, who wrote to me recently to say, and I quote, "While the Scottish Government rightly talks about the crucial importance of the third sector in delivering public services, the reality on the front line can be somewhat different. While there may be talk of the third sector being equal partners when funding challenges come, all too often integrated joint boards look to essential third sector services to bear the brunt, as if they can be removed without consequence. Glasgow City's board, for example, recently withdrew funding for Scottish Huntington's Association to provide a specialist service unilaterally and without consultation, and in so doing being chastened by its own audit department. This, despite the previous Health Secretary Neil Gray saying the Scottish Huntington's Association service keeps families well in the community, prevents crisis admissions to hospital and lessens the risk to suicide." End quote. So, I ask the Cabinet Secretary, will you meet urgently with the Scottish Huntington's Association to resolve this situation and others like it? Treating trusted specialist third sector partners in this way does not suggest they are equal partners delivering essential preventative services. It treats them as second-class citizens, useful in good times and expendable when budgets tighten. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, this is unsustainable. We must prioritise efficiency, clearer accountability and value for money in public services, ensuring resources are directed to frontline services rather than bureaucracy. And I thank Murdo Fraser, Stephen Kerr and Duncan Dunlop for sharing their concerns about the political activism among some so-called charities. All third-party organisations must be politically neutral. They mustn't support a particular party. And it's a legal position and the very definition of what is the third sector.
The member's winding up, so can't take an intervention.
Thank you. Presiding officer. Presiding officer, the proposed new third sector partnership agreement is welcome, but it must mean more than warm words. As several members, including Don Black and Colette Stevenson and Murdo Fraser, have pointed out, it needs fair, sustainable and genuine multi-year funding that matches the true value and cost of their work. On that, there is cross-party consensus, I believe. Scotland's third sector and the vulnerable people it serves deserve better. Thank you.
And I remind the Chamber of the Convention that there should be no interruptions or interventions on a first speech. I call on Samita Kumar to make a first speech and to close the debate on behalf of the Scottish Government.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. As this is my first contribution, I would like to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to the people of Edinburgh South Western for placing their trust in me to represent them. It is a profound honour and privilege. For those colleagues unfamiliar with Edinburgh South Western, it is a constituency defined by both its stunning natural landscape and its strong sense of community. As you approach Edinburgh, the majestic Pentland Hills rise on the horizon, marking the beginning of the Water of Leith, which winds its way through our capital. Yet, it's not only about the beauty of the landscape, but it is about the people who call it home that makes my constituency incredibly special. Across our communities, there is a spirit of kindness and resilience that I'm proud to represent today. I would also like to pay tribute to my predecessor, the formidable Gordon MacDonald. When I first met Gordon, I was struck by his determination and steadfastness. However, through working alongside him, I came to know the kindness, generosity, and genuine care that sit behind the determined exterior. Over time, he has become not only a colleague, but a friend, a mentor, and a source of wise counsel. Deputy Presiding Officer, after 15 years of service, Gordon chose to stand down at the last election to retire. Although, knowing Gordon, retirement may not be quite the right word, he has already spoken very enthusiastically about the number of charities he will be volunteering for. So it is with great pleasure that my first contribution is about strengthening the third sector, as this is something that Gordon and I are passionate about, and of course is the first debate in the Cabinet Secretary and my portfolio. I wanted to start by thanking all members who have contributed to this afternoon's debate. I thought there was a lot of consensus and genuine good debate in this room. Of course, it took an unfortunate turn in some of the contributions that chose to demonise some charities. But let me just come into covering some of the things that I found really valuable. Julie McDougall, some of the things you said, as an ex-councillor, I recognise some of the challenges that you've highlighted, so thank you for that. Carol Morgan, I just wanted to reassure you what you said about grassroots communities and organisations. I truly believe in that, actually, and one of the things I look forward to do is working with you in that space to see what we can do and do better. Holyrood, you thanked the workforce in our charity sector, and I absolutely believe that as well. But also, just to come on the point around the public sector reform, that doesn't mean cuts. It also means about having prevention agenda as part of the core of our approach. But one of the things that came through quite clearly is that message of that third sector is a fundamental part of how we deliver, support, tackle inequality and strengthen communities across our country. Within my own portfolio, the contribution from the third sector is clear. We've committed to a significant multi-year settlement for key disabled people's organisations, recognising their central role in achieving disability equality. This represents an important first step, and we will keep this approach under review as part of our wider work with the third sector. Multi-year funding provides the stability needed to plan longer term, invest in staff, develop services and build the relationships that drive lasting change. With greater certainty, the organisations can move beyond maintaining services to improving and expanding them, reaching more people and delivering better outcomes. It also enables more meaningful co-production, ensuring organisations can consistently shape policy and services, embedding the principle of nothing about us without us. Ultimately, multi-year funding strengthens the ability to deliver sustained long-term impact. Furthermore, community-level impact is being strengthened through the Improving Access Fund. Deputy Presiding Officer, 33 organisations across more than 30 local authority areas have been awarded £1.5 million to improve access to essential services, support independent living and enable disabled people to participate fully in society. Despite ongoing budget challenges, we remain firmly committed to a fairer, more inclusive Scotland, advancing equality, tackling discrimination across a wide range of priorities. Presiding Officer, I am new to this chamber, so perhaps this is me and my naive optimism, but we all spoke so passionately about multi-year funding. So whatever political party colours you represent, we all have representation in Westminster. So can I genuinely ask that you also appeal to your colleagues in Westminster to provide Scotland with that multi-year funding so that we can provide that onwards to our charities? Deputy Presiding Officer, I also wanted to recognise the vital role of volunteers in our society. Earlier this month, during Volunteers Week, I visited Maslow's community in Govan, an incredible hub offering classes, workshops and one-to-one support. I heard firsthand about their work supporting people who face barriers to volunteering, including those from ethnic minority communities, those experiencing intersectional barriers and those with lived experience of the asylum process. I saw how volunteering fosters community cohesion and reduces social isolation while growing the volunteer base. Alex Kerr, thank you very much for your invitation to come up into your constituency to see that fantastic work. If diary allows, I would love to take you up on that offer. This is just one of many examples across Scotland that show the wider impact of volunteering. It contributes an estimated £5.3 billion each year, but its value goes beyond that. Volunteering tackles loneliness, it improves well-being and builds confidence and open pathways into employment. Quite simply, volunteers are at the heart of our communities and our third sector. However, we must be honest about the challenges ahead. We know that the current system is not sustainable, and if we are to secure the essential support and services the third sector provides, we must take meaningful action together. It is in this context that the development of a new third sector partnership agreement represents a critical and necessary next step. This agreement will lay the foundations for a stronger and more sustainable sector. It will be co-designed with the sector, not imposed upon it, and we will recognise the third sector as a true partner in shaping and delivering solutions for the people and the communities of Scotland. The themes identified: developing a strategic partnership of equals, support a strong and independent sector, improving financial sustainability, and ensuring accountability at all levels. This is a real opportunity for the Scottish Government to demonstrate that we have listened, that we are committed to meaningful and lasting change. Presiding Officer, in closing, as we take this work forward, I want to be clear in our commitment. We will work alongside the sector in genuine collaboration to listen carefully to the voices, experiences and expertise across the sector to deliver meaningful partnership agreement that reflects our shared ambition. We truly cannot achieve this alone. We must formalise our relationship. I wanted to pause and reflect a little bit of what Maureen McCallum had said about understanding the strength of our third sector. And this is something I truly believe in, and I'd be really looking forward to working with you on that aspect. By working collaboratively, we can ensure that the third sector partnership agreement is not just a statement of intent, but a lasting agreement that supports a stable and sustainable sector and delivers real change for the people and communities of Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on strengthening Scotland's partnership with the third sector. It's now time to move to the next item of business, which is consideration of business motion 388 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on the revision to the business programme. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press the request to speak button now. I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
No member is asked to speak to the motion, therefore the question is that motion 388 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. We now move to decision time, and there are 6 questions to be put today. The first question is Amendment 356.2 in the name of Julie McDougall, which seeks to amend motion 356 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on strengthening Scotland's partnership with the third sector be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we will move to a vote. There will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system. We will now restart proceedings. The question is that Amendment 356.2 in the name of Julie McDougall be agreed. Members should cast their votes now. Voting is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 356.2 in the name of Julie McDougall is yes 26, no 77. There were 17 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The second question is that amendment 356.1 in the name of Carol Mochan be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed. Please vote now. Voting is closed. Point of order, Alex Kerr.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I think it's not registered my vote. I would have voted yes.
Your vote has now been recorded. Point of order, Liam Kerr.
I tried to vote no.
Your vote has been recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 356.1 in the name of Carol Mochan is yes 111, no 8. The amendment is therefore agreed. The next question is Amendment 356.5 in the name of Holly Bruce. Be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. Please vote now. Voting is closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 356.5 in the name of Holly Bruce is yes 77, no 25. There were 17 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. The next question is that Amendment 356.4 in the name of Murdo Fraser be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. Please vote now. Voting is closed. Point of order, Neil Bibby.
I'd have voted no, President.
Your vote has been recorded. Point of order, Maggie Chapman.
Thank you. I'm not sure if my vote was recorded. I would have voted no.
Was recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment 356.4 in the name of Murdo Fraser is yes 23, no 96. The amendment is not agreed. The next question is Amendment 356.3 in the name of Morven May McCallum be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are all agreed. The final question is that motion 356 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on growing Scotland's economy be, as amended, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. Please vote now. Voting is closed. Helen McDade, point of order.
I couldn't record my vote. I would have voted no.
Your vote has been recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on motion 356 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville as amended is yes 78. You want to hear the vote or not? No 26. There were 16 abstentions. Therefore, the motion as amended is agreed. That concludes decision time. We now move on to members' business. I ask members who are leaving the chamber to please do so quietly.